339. That is how many melee weapons are in Elden Ring. And I didn't just look them up. I beat the entire game with every single one of them. Some weapons took me by surprise, and some are utterly useless against bosses. After hundreds of hours and countless runs, this is my full ranking. Starting from worst and working our way to the best. A quick little side note, there are 5 categories that I base my rankings on. This is damage, stance damage, status effect, attack speed, and my rating. And these are their respective splits of how I determine their rankings. I mainly did it this way to kind of mediate a bias that I might have to specific weapons to give every weapon really a fair chance. All of this weapon was collected based off using their charge heavies, so all their damage, stance damage, status, attack speed is all based off their charge heavies, and of course my rating is just based off the rating I gave at the end of my run. And if you wanted to check out the websites that I used to gather all this research myself, they're all going to be on screen right now. Now that we're kind of done with this whole little sidetrack part, if you want to catch more of this stuff live, come check me out on the Twitch. Now let's get going. Weapon 339, Coated Sword. This is a somber straight sword that scales only with faith, dealing only holy damage. Its Ash of War unblockable blade extends its reach, but also still only does holy damage, doing a large sweeping attack. During my playthrough at the beginning of the game, I didn't really notice too much of a damage drop off, but as soon as I started fighting bosses like Malekith and Radagon, I noticed very noticeably how bad this weapon was. It was legit like an 8-minute fight against Radagon and Elden Beast. Took forever. Weapon 338, Magma Whip Candlestick. This is a somber whip that scales with strength, dex, and faith, dealing both physical and fire damage. Its Ash of War Sea of Magma does a twirling attack that spreads magma around your character, doing an AoE type attack. The main problem with this whip is that the Ash Ward is not very effective in PvE bosses, and the lack of damage from whips is pretty substantial. And you're not going to get really any staggers, not like it really matters since you can't even grab staggers. It just prolongs fight more than it really needs to. Weapon 337, Giant's Red Braid. This is another somber whip, scaling with strength, dex, and faith. This does a physical and fire damage split. The damage is slightly better than the Magma Whip Candlestick, but it still has the core weaknesses of the Magma Whip Candlestick. And its Ash of War Flame Dance does a 5-hit attack that does also an AoE, but the animation is way too long to even be useful in any fight, if I'm being honest. Weapon 336, Ivory Sickle. The Ivory Sickle is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Although it is a smithing dagger, you cannot change the Ash of War, and so you're just stuck with Quickstep. And the physical damage is, to put it simply, terrible. I mean, like, it's really bad. The only main good thing about this weapon is that you can attack a lot, but anything besides that, you're just kind of tickling the boss to death, Weapon 335, Carrion Sorcery Sword. This is a smithing, thrusting sword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. The whole gimmick of this weapon is that you could use this instead of a staff and not have to have anything in your, right hand to cast spells. See, I didn't realize that for about half of my playthrough, and I was wondering where my heavy attack was. But when I was told even the fact that you could use spells, the spell's damage is negated by 50%. So it's pretty useless in that fact too. So not only do you have barely any stance damage abilities with no charge heavies, you're also using spells that do 50% less damage. Do not use this weapon. Weapon 334, Torch Pole. The Torch Pole is a smithing spear that scales with strength and dex and deals physical and fire damage. I mean, there's not much to say on this besides it's a torch on a spear. The damage pretty low. The stance capabilities is pretty low as well, and you cannot change the Ash of War to put any status effects on it, so you're kind of just stuck hitting someone with a torch that does no stance damage. Weapon 333, Cypherpada. The Cypherpada is a somber fist weapon that scales entirely with faith, just like the Coated Sword. However, the The Cyberpada can actually do stance damage, even with its terrible damage. And its Ash of War Unblockable Blade is simply just a better unblockable blade for bosses than the Coated Sword, as it does a piercing attack instead of a slashing. The Cyberpada's ability to one-hand charge heavy bosses is its really only good point, as you're able to get a lot of staggers off really quickly, as with all of the fist weapons. Weapon 332, Eclipse Shotel. The Eclipse Shotel is a somber curved sword, scaling with Dex, Strength, and Faith. The main drawback of this weapon is that you cannot put any status effects on it, and considering it's a curved sword, that's their main prowess. The Ash of War Death Flare puts Death Blight on the weapon, but with PvE, there's quite literally no boss that you could proc Death Blight with, so it's really not powerful at all. But at least you could just jump power stance the weapon over and over again and still do okay damage for it. Weapon 331, Ripple Blade. The Ripple Blade is a smithing axe that scales exclusively with Arcane. The main idea of this weapon is that you apply greases or incants to the weapon for the high Arcane scaling. So I might be biased, but I hate having to run away from a boss to go apply a grease mid-fight and continue hitting that way. It takes away from the immersion almost. So I wouldn't necessarily this is a terrible weapon, it's highly unorthodox the way you have to play with this. The good thing is that it has wild strikes, so that's one of the best Ash Wars in the game, even though you can't change the Ash War even if you wanted to, and luckily it still has an amazing one. Weapon 330, Weathered Straight Sword. The Weathered Straight Sword is a smithing straight sword that scales only with strength and dex. This is as close as you can get to a broken straight sword in this game. Luckily you could put status effects on it, otherwise this would be utterly useless, because the base damage is absolutely terrible in every regard. And you could put Crag Blade or even Square Off, and it makes it much better to get that extra poise damage going. Weapon 329, Crystal Knife. The Crystal Knife is a smithing dagger that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split damage of physical and magic. Unlike almost every other smithing weapon in this game, you cannot change the Ash of War nor the status effects of this weapon. So that means no bleed, no frost, no utility, no usefulness, and you're stuck with a dagger that does hardly any poise damage, hardly any damage, and you're stuck with the Ash of War Quick Step, which everybody knows is obviously the best Ash of War in the game. Weapon 328, Crystal Spear. The Crystal Spear is a somber spear that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split damage of physical and magic, and like all crystal weapons, it cannot be infused or changed the Ash of War. But luckily, the Ash of War is Impaling Thrust, which is an amazingly good Ash of War for a spear. And throughout my whole run, I was just kind of spamming Impaling Thrust more often than not. But also, power stancing any spear in this game is really good, but it's very stamina consuming, so you have to level up your endurance a lot. I would just say it really prolonged the fights in the game. More than anything, not really affected anything too much. Weapon 327, Fire Spark Perfume Bottle. Fire Spark Perfume Bottle is a smithing perfume weapon, scaling with strength, dex, and faith. It does purely fire damage. The perfume bottles were really interesting to use. Unfortunately, they're not very powerful, especially since they nerfed the hell out of the lightning perfume bottle since release. The stance damage on this is basically non-existent. The damage is okay. There's a few bosses that really struggled because of the high fire resistance. Gideon with perfume bottles have to be the worst fight ever created on planet Earth. And I mean with every single one. Like, you would legit hit this guy over the head with a perfume bottle and he just eats that shit. And then proceeds to blast you with the Comet Missile. One shot, it's over. So yeah, do not use perfume bottles on Gideon, please. Weapon 326, Lightning Perfume Bottle. This is another smithing perfume bottle, scaling with strength, dex, and faith. But instead of fire, it does lightning. Woo! So much innovation going on. I know. I mean, luckily, there's some arenas like Elden Beast and Morgot, that you get that extra 10% from the lightning buff, but still has the same fundamental issues as perfume bottles, which is their lack of poise damage and the lack of repost ability. And Gideon, I hate you. Weapon 325, Spear of the Impaler. The Spear of the Impaler is a somber great spear that scales primarily with strength and dex. It does physical and fire damage. See, I don't know if I used this weapon wrong, but like, it was insurmountably dog. Like legit, every attack felt like it drained my entire stamina bar, and I was hitting every boss with a wet pool noodle. And the Ash of War, don't even get me on the Ash of War, because how the hell am I supposed to land a 30-second Ash of War on anything, on any boss, bro? And like, wait, what is this Ash of War supposed to do? But yeah, like it made boss fights way too long. The damage was pretty bad for considering how much stamina I'm taking. Like, I don't think I've ever got like a fucking stance break with this weapon, ever. Weapon 324, Death Ritual Spear. The Death Ritual Spear is a somber spear that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split physical and magic damage. A lot of bosses are not really too resistant to magic, so I didn't really notice a huge drop off anywhere in between. So the damage was okay. The main problem is spears take a lot of stamina. It's really hard to stay consistently hitting the bosses to get a stance break. And not to help, the Spear Call Ritual Ash of War is quite literally useless on most bosses, since they legit just input read it and move out of the area that all of the spears are coming down on. But at least it looked cool. Weapon 323, Vari's Bouquet. Vari's Bouquet is a somber hammer that scales with strength, dex, and arcane. Ash of War Blood Tax does a fury attacks to help bleed faster, which is basically the whole gimmick of this weapon. I mean, it has a huge, insane bleed proc, and it could be increased with grease. I mean, throughout the whole playthrough, I mean, the damage is ass. Like, everybody knows that. And I don't think anybody's gonna deny how bad the damage is, but it really only happened when I'm going against like Radagon and Elder Beast, where it took longer, since I was just getting so many bleed procs with it that the boss fights were not really held back too much. And luckily this is a hammer, so you could just do charged heavies after charged heavies and get a stance break on Radagon and Elden Beast. So I would just riposte over and over again and bang. Wasn't too bad. Weapon 322, Ripple Crescent Halberd. The Ripple Crescent Halberd is another smithing halberd that scales heavily with arcane. And by heavily, I mean everything with arcane. So it's just a longer version of Ripple Blade. So you better get your greases and your incans back in check. It's the exact same thing. Halberd has more reach, so that's the only reason why it's higher. Weapon 321, Serpent Flail. The Serpent Flail is a somber flail that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a split physical and fire damage. The Ash of War is Flare O Serpent, and it basically casts a buff on the weapon, so when you do a heavy attack, it does a huge explosion and it causes more heavy poise damage. See, the problem with that is it takes about 5 to 7 business days to actually get a charged heavy off on a flail. So like, you're almost never using this Ash of War to do anything. And the lack of status effects on the flail is also egregious. I'm just sitting here light attacking the whole entire run, just trying to get off this weapon. Weapon 320, Bastard Stars. Bastard Stars is a somber flail that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split physical and magic damage, but it's a flail, so doesn't really matter. The only good thing about this weapon is its looks and the Ash of War Nebula. It launches you forward and then it creates a mist of explosions, which deals a huge amount of poise damage and okay damage. So yeah, I was just sitting there spamming Ash of War, you know, abusing my Shard of Alexander, living life, and being glad I never have to use this weapon ever again. Weapon number 319, Lazuli Glintstone Sword. The Lazuli Glintstone Sword is a somber straight sword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split physical and magic damage, and like most straight swords, it's pretty balanced in that way. You have an okay attack speed and okay stance damage with alright reach. And it's Ash of War. Get this, guys. It's Glintstone. So OP. Wowzers. I mean, just hit them with a pebble over and over again, you know, until they get angry enough to attack you. But to give it credit, the Glintstone Pebble can help with the fact that the bosses sometimes go lobotomized and don't want to attack you, so it could create aggro that way and keep up the poise damage so it doesn't revert back, you know. But I mean, it's pretty low in damage and everything else. Weapon 318, Michelin Knight Sword. The Michelin Knight Sword is a summer straight sword scaling with strength, dex, and faith, and deals physical and holy damage. You're gonna see a very common theme, you know, with the holy damage thing, aka it's terrible in Elden Ring. I don't even know why they even added this shit. It's actually where Sacred Blade fires a holy projectile, and it adds an additional holy attack boost to your weapon. See, that would be good and all if it wasn't holy. I mean, as soon as you hit Farum Azula, bro, you're fighting for your life. You're hitting these bosses with a slightly moisturized pool noodle, and they're kind of enjoying it, so they're allowing you to do it. But you know, and then you're like 5 minutes into a boss battle, questioning why you're using this weapon, or at least I was. So, needless to say, I was happy to get off this weapon. Weapon 317, Earthsteel Dagger. The Earthsteel Dagger is a smithing dagger scaling with strength, dex, and faith. It does purely physical damage. But that physical damage is so low, it doesn't even matter. Luckily, the only thing that saves this weapon is that you can put status effects on it. And you could power stance it to actually get status effects way quicker. And you could also put Crack Blade on it to give it a little extra damage, but let's be real. You're hardly ever getting a poise break here. So it's really just run and attack a few times, keep up the status effects, and hope for the best. Weapon 316, Family Heads. Family Heads is a somber flail scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split damage of physical and magic. As many other things, flails continue to be terrible in this game. And unfortunately, it is a flail. The Astral War Familial Rancor. The Astral War Familial Rancor releases a swarm of homing spectral skulls that move so slowly that most bosses just run away from them. But it does still alright magic damage from them. So, I mean, I can't really hate on it too much. You could do it from a safe distance and have them come towards you and they get hit by them either way. But it's still a flail. You can hardly get off any attacks that do a lot of damage on any bosses. Weapon 315, Beast Claw. The Beast Claw is a smithing claw weapon that scales with strength and dex and come with the innate blade buildup. So luckily with this weapon, you can actually have double status effects. But I don't know if it's just me, but the lunging effect on every single attack really screws over how I fight bosses. At least 60% of my attacks miss, as I'm just like going right past the boss. The Astral War Savage Claws unleashes a large amount of attacks that accumulate the status effects. If every single attack didn't lunge me 20 feet ahead of me, I think this weapon would be a lot more useful. It's a DLC claw weapon, so that's kind of how they centered around the whole premise. So none of the PvE bosses really get micro staggered enough to help with the weapon. Weapon 314, Tooth Whip. The Tooth Whip is a somber whip that scales with strength and dex. It does purely physical damage and has an innate poison buildup. At least it has good range, the damage is pretty bad, and at least it has poison buildup, so almost every boss is gonna get poisoned. But the actual whip aspect of this weapon is terrible. The Astral War Painful Strike does like a 4-hit combo, helps build up the poison faster basically. This is basically just a ticking time bomb. Proc the poison, run away until he dies. So it's pretty boring in that aspect. It's not. Weapon 313, Throiler's Hidden Needle. Throiler's Hidden Needle is a somber fist weapon that scales with dex and intelligence, and it comes with an innate sleep buildup. Its Astral War Sleep Evermore does a impaling thrust type attack with 10% of the range, but at least it applies Eternal Sleep. And if you guys don't know what Eternal Sleep is basically a reduced sleep buildup You can hit them however many times you want and they won't wake up until the duration's over. But yeah, I mean, sleep is pretty useless unless you're fighting Godskin Duo, as most other PvE bosses would just wake up instantly anyway, so the Sleep Evermore doesn't really do much. Weapon 312, Golden Epitaph. The Golden Epitaph is a somber stray sword that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a split physical and holy damage. This immediately creates the same holy damage problem as every other weapon I've talked about already. So 50% of the weapon is basically useless at the end of the game, where it really matters the most. But at least the Astral Ward Last Rites buffs the weapon that gives it additional holy damage, which is pretty useless, as it's just adding more damage of a useless damage type. But I mean, it's a straight sword, so it wasn't really too much of an issue, since you just play how you would with any straight sword. I mean, my entire playthrough was pretty uneventful with this weapon, I would say. Weapon 311, Carrion Knight Sword. The Carrion Knight Sword is a somber straight sword scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split physical and magic damage, which makes sense since it's a carrion type weapon. Its Astral Ward Carrion Grandeur is the huge blade that does massive damage and a lot of poise damage. Unfortunately, it takes about 20 years to actually charge up the attack to actually do that massive amount of damage and poise. I mean, you would quite literally need a stance break to even get this off. Weapon 310, Crystal Sword. The Crystal Sword is a smithing straight sword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split physical and magic damage, and you also cannot change the Astral Ward nor the status effects, just like all the other crystal weapons. So you're stuck with Spinning Slash that is okay, but is not very useful for many boss fights, as you're just better off light attacking or charge heavy. But overall, during my playthrough, it wasn't too bad. I would just play normally, and it just took slightly longer than usual. A very uneventful weapon, more or less. You're not really getting anything out of it. Weapon 309, Gargoyle's Black Halberd. The Gargoyle's Black Halberd is a somber halberd that scales with strength, dex, and faith, thus dealing a split physical and holy damage. And once again, holy on a weapon is just terrible. It's just a running joke at this point. I mean, you're gonna see a lot more Gargoyle's Black things down the road, and they're all gonna have the same issue of having that holy damage split. And it's just, the Radagon Elden Beast fight is just so much worse with it. But the halberd, it does alright with the actual other rest of the damage and the poise breaks. But Spinning Slash on a halberd, it's okay. I mean, I still prefer just doing charged heavies over anything, so. Weapon 308, Noble Slender Sword. The Noble Slender Sword is a smithing straight sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. It has the ability to infuse with anything, and its Astral Ward Square Off is really good, but you could still change it if you wanted to, but Square Off is an amazing Astral Ward to have innately. I just kind of put bleed on it and called it a day. Just use Square Off, Shard of Alexander them out. I mean, you could really use Relina's cameo as well if you really wanted to. It's really pretty overpowered, but the actual Noble Slender Sword part of it, the damage is not very high, as it's quite slender, you might say. Alright, don't click off, please. Anyways, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's a pretty, I would say it's pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of straight swords, though, more than anything. Weapon 307, Blade of Calling. The Blade of Calling is a somber dagger that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split, physical, and holy damage. God, if I see one more holy damage weapon, I'm gonna do nothing, because I already know I am. But this is just a Timu version of Black Knife. And by Timu, I just mean it's terrible, because the Astral Ward Blade of Gold legit just shoots out a holy projectile, and it's quite ass. Not even quite, it's quite literally dog shit. More or less, you're just power stancing the daggers, and not even using the Astral War, but I mean, at the end of the day, it is what it is. Still have the ability to do a ranged attack. Weapon 306, St. Trina's Torch. St. Trina's Torch is a somber weapon that scales primarily with strength and faith. It does fire damage, and it applies sleep buildup. Like the GOAT torches are, the poise damage is on point. I think most of the time it's like 4 charge attacks to knock anybody. But you know, unfortunately you can't actually grab the riposte, so you're kind of just gonna take free damage, free light attacks on the weapon. And its Astral War fires a slumber. It is basically like the fire breath attack, but with, you know, sleep buildup in it. Weapon 305, Beast Repellent Torch. The Beast Repellent Torch is another smithing torch that scales with strength and dex, and does physical and a fire damage split. This is basically just another torch, but it repels beast. Wow, who would have guessed, right? And so you're basically just gonna, it's just another torch. I mean, there's not really much to talk about. You're legit charge, attack, reliant, and then light attack when they stagger over and over again. Weapon 304, Sentry's Torch. It is a somber torch scaling with strength, dex, and faith, dealing a physical and a holy split. No, it's just another torch, except instead of fire, you're just doing holy damage. So, I mean, there's really not much to say. That is the problem with holy damage, but it still does more damage than the other torches ahead of it. That's the only main difference. So really you could interchange these torches, you know, in however way you want to do it. But I just put Sentry's Torch here. Weapon 303, Halberd. The Halberd is a smithing, you know, halberd, scaling with strength and dex. And it does purely physical damage, but you could actually infuse this with anything you want. You know, unlock your brain and change it into whatever you want. But I also do not like the halberd moveset, so that wasn't much. I would quite literally just put Giant's Hut on it, or Cragblade. Giant's Hut specifically for Gideon, because we all know Gideon likes to get thrusted upwards over and over again. We love that for him. It was pretty uneventful as always with all these basic type weapons. It wasn't particularly powerful. The damage was alright. The ability to change status effects was, you know, very versatile. So that helped, but yeah. Weapon 302, Horn Warrior's Greatsword. It is a somber curved greatsword scaling mainly with strength and dex. It scales with strength and dex and does a complete physical damage. The physical damage is alright. The main problem is they can't infuse it with anything, and if you can't infuse it, you expect a higher physical damage than it has right now, but it just lacks it, you know, plain and simple. And the Astral War, a horn calling storm. Basically, you just turn into a furry, you know, more or less. And you're just gonna get punished by every boss that you do that against, you know. It's just not very powerful for PvE purposes. Weapon 301, Deadly Poison Perfume Bottle. The one singular somber perfume bottle, and they made the Astral War so ass, it's actually egregious. And you poison yourself, creates a mist of stank, and it poisons the boss with you. So you better have some boluses or something where, you know, flame cleanse me. Because, there's really no point. Just spam light attacks to get the actual poison proc off. But it does scale with strength, dex, and arcane. So I mean, you could build up that physical damage aspect. It just won't work well. And as always, screw you, Gideon. I never want to fight you with a perfume bottle ever again. Weapon 300, Frenzied Flame Perfume Bottle. Gideon, I hate you. That's why it was actually quite enjoyable to use this weapon, because I like to see you go mad every time. Every 27 hits, you would go mad. It was quite wonderful. But it is another smithing perfume bottle. That scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and faith. All four of them, you know. Except that no, all four of them are not giving you high damage. Trust me, I know. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty useless. It was only good against Gideon. And you're not proccing madness anywhere else, so you're quite literally just smacking them with some perfume, making them smell nice. It was alright. Matter of fact, it was not alright. Because Elden Beast, why are you in water? Why am I using a frenzy flame perfume bottle against Elden Beast? Weapon 299, chilling perfume bottle. The last perfume bottle, amen. I cannot think of a worse weapon category than this. Than these perfume bottles, bro. It is a smithing perfume bottle, scaling with strength, dex, intelligence, and faith. All four of the categories again. You would think with 4 categories, it would do some damage. But even if you put that shit to 99 on all of them, you know, you're better off using the Kick Ash of War, which so conveniently it has on it. But you can really change it to any of the other perfume bottle Ashes of War. But in reality, all the Ashes of War on perfume bottles are pretty dog, so makes no point. This one's just the best because, you know, Frostbite is probably the best behind Blade for status effects, so yep. Weapon 298, Dancing Blade of Vernal. It's a summer curved sword scaling with only stacks, which is, it's kind of insane, but a curved sword with no ability to make status effects is quite bad. I mean, the base damage on this is excellent. I'm not gonna lie on that fact, but like, it looks cool and all, and the Ash of War Unending Dance looks cool, but in reality, you're never hitting that Ash of War unless like you're like Sleeping Godskin Duo, or you're on Elden Beast. The minute you start that Ash of War, you're getting straight pummeled by any other boss. Like, so yeah, and there's no poise on it. You can't like hyper armor through an attack, so you're kind of just using a very high base physical damage curved sword build. Weapon 297, Clean Wrought Spear. It is a somber spear that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a physical and holy damage split. All you really need to take from this, it's a holy spear basically, you know. Take a spear, make it sacred, bang, you got Clean Wrought Spear. And it would be pretty ass. Unless you're gonna go fight some Deathrite birds, you know, then this shit might be #1. But you ain't. Cause that's not how you beat the game. And it's Ash of War Sacred Phalanx. I probably said that majorly bad. I mean, most bosses are not getting hit by this, if we're being real. Like, it's a it's a delayed attack. Like, not many bosses are falling for delayed attacks. So yeah, you know, I was just going around poking bosses until they're dead, which took quite a while with this weapon. Weapon 296, Winged Scythe. It is a somber scythe that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a physical and holy damage split. Luckily, all scythes have an innate bleed buildup, which is the only thing that's saving this because it's Ash of War Angel's Wings. Like, any main game bosses allowing you to do this full Ash of War. You know, because you do that one attack that launches you up in the air. You know, that's basically like an underhand throw, and someone's about to hit a home run on your ass. Cause like you're in that air for a while too, and the damage is not even worth it. Like, legit, use any other scythe than this one, bro. This one's diabolically bad. Weapon 295, Commander's Standard. Now, if you're using this weapon other than to buff, what are you doing, gang? Legit, the Ash of War Rallying Standard is the only reason you should be using this weapon. But let's say you are, you know, it is a somber halberd that scales with strength and dex, and it does purely physical damage. so you won't really find any issues there. But you're legit getting no status effects. I mean, whatever floats your boat, I guess, is really just not a good weapon. So keep that in the left hand, buff it, get rid of it. Boom. That's all you should be doing. Weapon 294, Stone Sheath Sword. It is a somber straight sword scaling with strength and dex and does few. And it deals pure physical damage. The Ashore Square Off is an amazing Ashore to have on a straight sword. And it's quite literally the only thing that is beneficial of this weapon. I mean, the base damage is still alright with the weapon, and it's really easy to upgrade. The only use of this weapon is to really use it to either get Sword of Light or Sword of Darkness. So it's kind of just a placeholder. It's still a dependable straight sword and easily controlled, and there's not really, the moveset doesn't change from any of the other straight swords, so it's really easy to understand and to understand the punishable attacks on bosses. Weapon 293, Envoy's Horn. It's a somber hammer, scaling with faith, strength, and dex, and it does a split of holy and physical damage. Its actual shoots a small ass bubble, but at least you could chain it with multiple other bubbles, and it doesn't really do much damage if I'm being honest. And the projectile is really slow, like insanely, but at least it's a hammer, so its poise damage is pretty decent. And most of the time you're just gonna be relying on that, just charge heavies over and over again. So yeah. Weapon 292, Golden Order Greatsword. It is a somber greatsword scaling with strength, dex, and faith, and doing a split of physical and holy damage. The Ashore Established Order unleashes a explosion type first attack, and then it has a follow-up that does a sweeping projectile. The main problem is, it takes so long to even do the explosion that by the time you even start the projectile, you're gonna get hit out of it, so it's pretty useless in that fact. I mean, at least it's a great sword, so, you know, it does great sword type attacks, but the damage is pretty heavily nerfed with the holy damage and no status effects ability. Weapon 291, Urumi. It is a smithing whip that scales with strength and dex and deals purely physical damage. It can be infused with any status effect that you have, and you could also put like Royal Knight's Resolve or even Cragblade. I would suggest more Royal Knight's Resolve for whips, as you're really not getting a whole lot of attacks in at once. It's like every other whip, it really does struggle with getting stance breaks, and stance breaks are really not even worth it. The long range is really its only benefit, but a lot of times you could get caught due to the long animations. Weapon 290, Whip. It's a smithing whip that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. This is basically a 1-to-1 of the Urumi, but the whip just has a slightly better damage lead, so anything you do with the Urumi, just do with the whip, and you just get a little bit more damage. Weapon 289, Smith Script Spear. It is a smithing spear that scales with strength, dex, faith, and intelligence, but it only does pure physical damage. Luckily, it could be infused with any status effect, as long as you have the wet blades. Its default Ash of War is Impaling Thrust, but you could also exchange it for any of the spear compatible ashes as well. The only problem with this weapon is that when you throw the weapon, the damage drop up is really huge, and you're not getting a whole lot of stance pressure with the charged attacks. And also, it does a huge amount of stamina consumption for the actual ranged attacks. Overall, it's really underwhelming. Weapon 288, Axe of Godfrey. It is a somber colossal weapon scaling with strength and dex, and does purely physical damage. And unfortunately, it does not live up to the name of the GOAT Godfreyman. I wish it was better. The Regal War Ash of War unleashes a huge shockwave, the one that he does in between the 1.5 phase shift, and it also grants you that 7.5% physical damage buff and the +5 strength. Unfortunately, it's just not good. It's just the stance damage, you're not getting a full charged heavy, and the Regal Roar changes the charge attack heavy. A lot of times I'm just rolling and then doing a light attack because you're not getting any other attacks off with this weapon. Weapon 287, Nox Flung Sword. It is a somber curved sword scaling with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Unfortunately, it is another curved sword that you cannot push status effects on. In its Ash of War flowing form, it's pretty mid. I would say it's not even worth using the Ash of War on this, unless you don't have a second curved sword that you could just power stance with. But I mean, the physical damage is okay, and you could just continuously hit them over and over again. I mean, the flowing form does have range, don't get me wrong, it's just a long animation, so you could find yourself getting punished longer. Weapon 286, Horn Warrior Sword. It is also another somber curved sword scaling with strength, dex, and faith, but only does pure physical damage. The holy aspect of this comes from horn calling, which it's not as bad as other holy aspects, as the actual Ash of War summons the piercing horns from the ground, but it's a ranged aspect of it, you know. But it's ultimately over other curved swords that doesn't have status effects simply because it has a higher base physical damage, and you only need one, as it is a dual wield weapon. Weapon 285, Spirit Sword. It is a somber curved sword scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence, and it does a split physical and magic damage. Its Ash of War Rancor Slash basically does a double hit that summons out Rancors, and then has a follow-up that summons 3 Rancors. So it's basically just added damage, and those do frostbite build up. So it is possible to proc frostbite on this weapon. It's just very minimal, and you would have to use the Ash War a lot. More often than not, it's just better to get 2 of them and just power stance them, and just use those just to deal as much damage as once. Weapon 284, Regalia of Eokade. I probably butchered the hell out of that. No lie. It is a somber straight sword scaling strength, dex, and arcane. It does a split physical and magic damage, and it's basically just an AliExpress version of Maria's Executioner Blade. So the Ash of War is basically the same thing. It just does a skewer attack, but it's significantly worse in damage aspects. It's actually so bad. Unbelievably bad. Even with the Rotten Sword Insignia and Shard of Alexander stuff that amplifies the Ash, it's not even worth it. I straight up only used it as a straight sword. So yeah, that's why it's basically all the way down here. Weapon 283, Death Knight Twin Axes. It is a somber axe scaling with strength, dex, and faith that deals split physical and lightning damage. The Ash of War Blink Bolt Twin Axe is a 2-attack Ash of War, one where it gives iframes, and then the second one where it does the spinning move that actually does the damage. I'm not a huge fan of the twin axe aspect, as I never really liked power stancing axes. It felt very clunky and takes way longer to attack than I would like. But the lightning damage didn't really affect the weapon too much, as some of the bosses it actually benefited towards. The Ash of War, you could not really get off a lot unless you did a stance break and you wanted to look cool, but just grabbing a riposte would be better anyways. Weapon 282, Halo Scythe. It is a somber reaper scaling with strength, dex, and faith thus dealing a split physical and holy damage. And luckily for it, it has an innate bleed buildup. It's Ash of War, Miquella's Ring of Light. It just shoots a huge piss ring, like Gideon's piss ring. It's just one of those, but actually has tracking. But you could also spam it, so like if the boss is really far away, you could just spam it over and over again, get free damage. But other than that, the scythe, it was pretty mediocre at best. The damage was okay until you got late game because of the the holy damage, and then it all went to shit. Weapon 281, Sacred Relic Sword. It's a somber gray sword scaling with strength, dex, and faith, dealing a split physical and holy damage. Now, if you're not using this only to farm, what are you doing? Because its actual Wave of Gold is legit only good for killing Albinarchs. Literally anything else, you're wasting your time. I mean, this was just another great sword that I fought with. Like, that's all I'm thinking. I'm like, alright, time to use a great sword that doesn't do any status effects or high damage. Yippee. So, yeah, it's pretty bad. Weapon 280, Great Sword of Solitude. It's a somber great sword scaling with strength, dex, and does pure physical damage. The Ash of War Solitary Moonslash first attack shoots a range vacuum slice type attack that does pure physical damage. Then it also has a follow-up attack that does like a spinning / lunge attack towards an enemy, basically. Whoever you're locked on or whatever direction. I mean, it's just a great sword based around pure physical damage, as you can't put status effects on it. But it still struggled even at that, The Ash of War is pretty useless most of the time, and just found myself using it as a regular great sword. Weapon 279, Loretta's War Sickle. It is a somber halberd scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence. It deals split physical and magic damage. The Ash of War Loretta Slash, it basically launches you in the air and does a spinning attack downwards, and a lot of times you cannot use it. If I'm being honest, you're not getting that off in most boss fights. So I mean, I did like the halberd moveset where it just does the underneath slash. It was pretty quick. I got a lot of punishable attacks off that, but other than that, it was just not very powerful. Weapon 278, Magma Worm Scale Sword. It is a somber curved greatsword scaling with strength, dex, and faith, and it deals a physical and fire damage split. The Ash of War Magma Guillotine basically launches you in the air, and then you land on them, and then it creates a spreading magma effect around the place that you hit. And it does a huge amount of poise damage, but the Ash of War is pretty long, so you're not getting that off most of the time against the bosses. And the magma just doesn't last very long, if I'm being honest. But the curved greatsword moveset is good enough to really make up for that fact. And the charge heavy was really fun to use. Yeah, it's very similar to like the butchering knife, which I find very, I don't know, I find it very fun to use for some reason. A lot of people don't like it, but I kind of enjoyed it. Weapon 277, Short Spear. It is a smithing spear scaling with strength and dex, dealing pure physical damage. Luckily, you could apply status effects with this weapon, and you could change the Ash of War even though it has impaling thrust on it, which is already amazing. Chef's kiss. I'm glazing impaling thrust too much, but it is a good Ash of War. And with the name, it's Short Spear, so it's just a shortened spear. But it takes the same amount of stamina and basically the same amount of frames in the attack speed, so it's significantly worse than other spears. But yeah, it's just another functional, flexible spear. Weapon 276, Pole Blade of the Bud. But it's really not a pole blade, because it's a somber halberd scaling with strength, dex, and arcane. And it only does physical damage. but it does do rot buildup, luckily. The Astral War Rominus Purification. An Astral War you will never be landing on any boss ever, as it legit just has you floating in the air over and over again, and then it leaves the explosive butterflies that, you know, pop after the Astral War. I mean, rot is still very powerful, so it's higher than other weapons, but overall, it's just terrible. It's a terrible remembrance weapon. Take this shit out of the game immediately. Weapon 275, Serpent Hunter. It's a somber great spear, scaling with strength and dex, dealing pure physical damage. No, most of the time you're only using this against Rykard, unless you're speedrunning back in 2023, bro, before they found out what Death's Poker is. But yeah, I mean, if you're speedrunning the game and you don't want to learn anything else, this is an amazing weapon. Other than that, it's really not that good. But yeah, it just does a lot of physical damage. Good stance breaks. That's about it. Weapon 274, Vulgar Militia Shodel. It is a smithing halberd scaling with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. You can also apply different stats effects with this with the wet blades, and you could apply any halberd compatible Astral War with this and get it going, I guess. I mean, it's just another halberd, nothing really too crazy about this weapon, honestly. I mean, it's legit a stick with a shoulder on it. It doesn't look very appealing. It's just another halberd that you play with. Weapon 273, Cross Naginata. Now I might get some flack for this. A lot of people seem to really love this weapon for some reason. I mean, it is a smithing spear that scales with strength and dex. It does physical damage, and it does have innate bleed buildup. And you could change the Astral War to wherever you really want. So it's good in that aspect. But I don't know. I just didn't really seem to enjoy the weapon too much when I was playing. It felt way more heavier than I expected. I mean, if I probably power stanced it, it would probably have been better. But the actual just one weapon of it seemed very lackluster, more or less. Weapon 272, Greatsword of Radahn, Lord version. It is a somber colossal sword, scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a split physical and magic damage, but the Astral War does purely holy damage, which is very odd. I mean, I guess at least they didn't add a faith requirement, I guess. Thank God, I don't want to see another holy based. But like the Astral War, you're not even really hitting like at all, like if we're being honest. And the swords in general, it takes your whole stamina bar every single attack, no matter what. And the dual wielding does not do stance breaking justice with this weapon, I'm not gonna lie. So I mean, the damage is alright, that's the only reason. Dual wielding, that looks cool, but it's really not that beneficial. Weapon 271, Greatsword of Radahn, light version. This is basically not even basically, it is a 1-to-1 copy of the Greatsword of Radahn Lord version. It just changes the Astral War to light speed slash. And it's only ranked higher because I hit the Astral War more often with the light version. So, yeah. Weapon 270, Star Scourge Greatsword. Wow, all three Radahn's Greatswords in a row. Who would have guessed? I would, because I did the list. It's another somber colossal sword, scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence. But luckily, the Astral War does not do holy damage. It's just so hard to hit with anything that's not Gideon. It's just a gravity. It's a gravity attack, and then it does a follow-up attack that does an explosion. Wowzers. It also does better damage than the other two Greatsword of Radahn's, so that's why it's ranked higher than those. But overall, these dual wield somber colossal weapons need to stop. We need to stop creating these. Weapon 269. Smith Script Dagger. The Smith Script Dagger is the only throwing dagger in the game, and it scales with strength, dex, and faith, and intelligence, and it does pure physical damage. And luckily, you're able to put status effects on this, because if not, Radagon would have been hell. I mean, he still was hell because every single attack made him do the parry grab attack over and over again. But you could also put like parry on it, make Radagon much easier. And a lot of people hate on this weapon more often than not for some reason. I can still appreciate the weapon as like you can consistently get the status build up because you could just attack from whenever. I mean, you're not getting a huge physical damage aspect due to the drop off, but it wasn't terrible. Not as bad as some people claim it to be. Weapon 268. Sword of Light. It is a somber straight sword scaling with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and holy damage. The Ashwar Light releases a huge burst of holy damage in all directions basically, and it temporarily buffs the weapon's holy damage afterwards. And needless to say, this Ashwar is only good for the buff, because that burst of holy damage, it ain't doing none. And it's, it's giving a little suntan to every boss. But yeah, I just use it as another straight sword, and it worked well. Straight swords are pretty decent in this game. Weapon 267. Sword of Darkness. Now this is the counterpart to the Sword of Light. And the Sword of Darkness also scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a split physical and holy damage. But the Ashwar Darkness does a huge circle cloud, and it reduces the enemy's holy damage negation. But nonetheless, it's just another straight sword. The Ashwar is kind of hard to get off, but if you're in front of him, luckily, like, if you get hit out of it, most of the time, the darkness cloud, I guess you could say, had already hit the boss in front of you. So they already got the effect. You're going to use it as any other straight sword in this game. Weapon 266. Dry Leaf Arts. This weapon belongs to one of two of the hand-to-hand categories, scaling primarily with strength and dex, and it does pure physical damage. But you can put status effects on this, and you can also exchange other hand-to-hand type Ashes of War onto this, which are okay. Not a lot of them are good, I would say. It took a while to get used to this weapon, as a lot of the attacks are multi-hit. So that's really good for the status buildup, but when you're expecting a one-hit to bosses, you're going to get caught a lot more and get punished a lot more with these attacks, I would say. And that's the main reason where I struggled with this weapon. Weapon 265. Celebrant's Sickle. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage, but can also have status effects applied to it. The cool thing about the Celebrant's weapons is that every attack that you do, you gain 10 runes, which, now that you say it, it's pretty ass. They make you think, oh wow, higher runes every time, you get runes every time you attack, but it's 10 runes, what am I doing? Maybe Ronnie will do some extracurricular activities for some change, Hold on, let me get out my fantasies. Anyways, but yeah, it's just another dagger that you just hit over and over again and apply statuses. Nothing too out of the ordinary with this weapon. Weapon 264. Spirit Glaive. It's a somber halberd that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and does a split damage of physical and magic. And like other spirit weapons, the Ashwar Spiritful, when doing a spinning slash type move, summons wraiths with them. The damage was alright with this weapon. The halberd moveset kinda limited on what I could really do. I wouldn't really find myself using the full Ashwar a lot of the times because PvE bosses don't often allow you to get such a long Ashwar off. So I kind of just use it as a normal halberd most of the time, and then when they're staggered I use the Astral War to get some extra damage. Weapon 263, Winged Greathorn. It is a summer great axe scaling with strength and dex and dealing physical damage only. Astral War Soul Stifler creates a area of effect that reduces the damage negation of the bosses. Luckily it was a great axe, so the actual moveset of the weapon was really good, especially spamming light attacks. And the Astral War is actually a decent Astral War. I just wish the area of effect was a little bit larger, because a lot of times bosses would just move out of it and it would be pretty useless. And since it's such a long, recovery period after starting it, it's kind of risky to play it actually. But overall, it's a okay great axe. Weapon 262, Death Knight's Long Haft Axe. It is a somber great axe scaling with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and lightning damage. This is basically just the longer version of the twin axes as part of the Death Knight collection. So the Astral War Blink Bolt Long Haft it's the same thing where the first part does a blink bolt and it gives you iframes, and then it gives you the follow-up is a huge strike. But during my playthrough, I didn't find much usefulness in the Astral War. It's more or less that it just takes too long for the follow-up to even happen. But the damage was good sometimes due to the lightning damage, giving that extra boost against some bosses. And overall, it's a lot more flashy than usable, I would say. Weapon 261, Axe of Godric. It's a summer great axe scaling with strength, dex, and does pure physical damage. The Astral War, I Command Thee Kneel, slams that axe 3 times, and the third one being a lot longer and creating a huge shockwave with it. And for it being such a long Astral War, it does not do enough poise damage, and only really works against NPCs. That's why you can only really use it against Gideon, and it's only really useful. Like the damage is better just to consistently hit with like heavies or light attacks. But nevertheless, it's still a great axe, so the actual moveset's decent and not too punishing, I would say. And I just found myself just playing normally. I didn't really have to change anything. It was pretty uneventful. Not many opportunities to use the Astral War, I would say. Weapon 260, Ornamental Straight Sword. It is a somber straight sword scaling with strength, dex, and dealing pure physical damage. Unlike other straight swords, it is a dual wield weapon. In the Astral War Golden Tempering, it buffs holy damage and it changes the dual wield sword attacks. I thought this was a really cool weapon, nonetheless. Even though the damage was pretty low and the Astral War buffs holy damage, it just gives you like a base, I think it's like 75 or something like that. But the multi-hit purposes on this weapon is kind of insane. Like I'm pretty sure like when you do the Golden Tempering, it hits like 10 times if you do a charged heavy. But it also is not doing a lot of poise damage, so it's kind of a trade-off there. But still definitely fun to use, I would say. Weapon 259, Torch. The basic torch is, the torch. I think everybody knows it by now. Just it does a lot more damage than the other torches further down the list, and crazy poise damage. And yeah, there's not really much to say about it other than hit someone with a burning stick until they're dead. Pretty cool. Weapon 258, Nania's Torch. It is a somber torch scaling with strength, faith, and intelligence, dealing a split physical and fire damage. And the Astral War releases a huge burst of frenzied flame. It's basically just the flame of frenzied incantation, but in a torch form. So I mean, this is basically just a torch, but it does better against Gideon. That's the simplest way to talk about it, and it actually gives a decently useful Astral War on a torch for once. Weapon 257, Rhine Crystal Spear. It is a somber spear scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence, and it deals a split physical and magic damage, but unlike the other crystal spears, this one has Scarlet Rot. So that's why I make it so much better, because Scarlet Rot is actually very useful in Elden Ring. The weapon has to have it innately, and it actually deals crazy amount of damage and stays on there for a long time. And luckily for the Rhine Crystal Spear, it has Impaling Thrust, which is amazing for poise damage. So it's basically just spam Impaling Thrust and light attacks until you get Scarlet Rot, and you win. And that was basically my whole playthrough. Weapon 256, Scythe. It is a Smithing Reaper scaling with strength and dex and dealing pure physical damage, but it also has an innate bleed buildup. This means that you could actually have two status effects on this. You could have Bleed Frost, which is pretty OP, but you could also put any Astral War that a Scythe can have. So yeah, it was just a double proc crutching at that point, you know. I mean, bosses went pretty quickly. It was just the Scythe moveset is really slow, so I felt like the actual status buildups took way too long to actually proc most of the time. Weapon 255, Pest Glaive. It is a smithing halberd scaling with strength and dex, and it deals pure physical damage. It can have any Astral War halberd can have, and it's basically just another halberd replica. It looks slightly more cool, and you actually have to farm it, which is kind of unfortunate, but yeah, just use it like any other halberd, put some bleed, put some frost on it, and it'll do as good as basically any other halberd in the game. Weapon 254, Glaive. It is a smithing halberd scaling with strength and dex and does a pure physical damage, but you could also put status effects on it. I mean, it's another generic version of the weapon category, so you could put any Astral War that a halberd can have. You know, there's nothing too crazy going on here. Just use it like any other glaive that you would use, and it'll do just middle of the pack at this point. Weapon 253, Clayman's Harpoon. It is a smithing spear scaling with strength, dex, and intelligence, and it does a split physical and magic damage. You could put any Astral War that a spear can have on this. Nothing's really too unique about this weapon besides it being a person's harpoon. Just use it like a regular spear. I would probably power stance it, as that's probably the best course of action with most spears. But it's definitely flexible with the intelligence scaling, so you could go fight the gargoyles with it if you really want to, but probably still would not suggest it as unique strike. Weapon 252, Tree Spear. It is a somber great spear scaling with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and holy damage. The Astral War Sacred Order temporarily buffs the weapon and increases damage against undead enemies. And if you know anything about Elden Ring, there's legit no undead enemies required to beat the game. So it was pretty useless in that fact. But it was still a great spear, so it wasn't terrible. But the holy damage really did affect it later on, as you couldn't get the attack speed didn't really help it make up for the fact that it does holy damage, especially on like Elden Beast and Radagon. So I kind of just relied on getting stance breaks from it. It's definitely one of the worst great spears in the game. Weapon 251, Golem Halberd. It is a smithing colossal weapon, and it scales primarily with strength, and it deals pure physical damage. But you can also change the Astral War, so you could have the different status effects on it, so it doesn't fully make it not as less versatile, as you could say. My main irk with this weapon is that it just felt too clunky, and it felt like it took too many hits to get a stagger. Or maybe I just wasn't hitting too much concurrently with it, as it was just such a slow weapon. I had better success with other colossal weapons than this. Weapon 250, Envoy's Longhorn. It is a Somber Greyhammer scaling with Strength, Dex, and Faith, and it does a split physical and holy damage. The Astral War Bubble Shower releases a huge area effect of bubbles, and they burst, or when they get touched, they pop then. I mean, the Astral War, it did not do a lot of damage. I feel like it's really only good for AoE type attacks, controlling a whole bunch of enemies at once, which is not a huge effect in completing the game. But it was still okay. It got poise breaks quite consistently, but the damage just wasn't there. Weapon 249, Devourer's Scepter. It is a Summer Greathammer, scaling with Strength and Faith, and deals pure physical damage. In the Astral War Devourer Worlds, slams the weapon to the ground and releases a huge shockwave that drains the enemy's health. But you're not really getting the Astral War off many times. And it doesn't even micro stagger like hardly anyone besides Gideon. So yeah, you're just kind of just better just going for regular attacks with this weapon. Unless you're getting ganked by 30 other enemies and then you use the Astral War. But yeah, for being the game purposes, just use the weapon as any other Great Hammer. Or just use a different Great Hammer, that's better. Weapon 248, Flowerstone Gavel. It is a somber hammer scaling with Strength and Arcane, and does pure physical damage. The Astral War Flower Dragon Bolt summons a Dragon Bolt from the sky and hits him with lightning, basically. It's just lightning. It's just like the lightning Astral War, or Incant. Except that reduces the lightning damage negation that the person has. Which makes no sense since this weapon legit doesn't do any lightning damage unless you're doing the Astral War. So it's quite literally only useful if you switch to a lightning based weapon. I don't really get that, but kind of underwhelming with that fact for the rest of the playthrough. I just can continue using it as a regular hammer. Weapon 247, Ringed Finger. It is a somber hammer scaling with Strength and Dex, and it deals pure physical damage. Astral War Claw Flick enlarges the finger and flicks them away. If the boss could get micro staggered, they get micro staggered, and if they could get flicked away, they get flicked away, basically. When I played it, I was expecting more damage, if I'm being honest, but it was pretty underwhelming. Like, for a weapon that doesn't have any status effects, it was pretty low, more often than not. But it's still a decent weapon. Like, the Claw Flick is still fun to use most of the time against bosses, so maybe it's just a preference thing, but it was definitely underwhelming from what I heard. Weapon 246, Smith's Script Circ. It is a smithing backhand blade, and it scales with Strength and Dex, dealing pure physical damage. The thing about this weapon is that not every attack is actually throwing. It's only the charged heavies and the regular heavies. And you can put Blind Spot on this weapon, so that helps a lot. Like, you just spam Blind Spot and they run away, and then you do a charge attack. You can get status pretty quickly if you put status on it. But it's still fun to use in that sense. You're probably not going to kill bosses very quickly with the throwing attacks, but it's still fun to use, I would say. Weapon 245, Knight Rider's Flail. It is a somber flail scaling with Strength and Dex, and it deals a pure physical damage, and it has innate bleed buildup. And the good thing about this weapon is you could also have a double status effect, and the light attacks are quick enough to actually apply those status effects. So a lot of times I'm just running Bleed and Frostbite and just light attacking every boss to death. And it works well. Shout out to Knight Rider's Flail, but you're not getting like hardly any stance breaks or anything like that, as you can't really do charged heavies with this weapon, with it being a flail and all. But definitely one of the stronger flails in the game. Weapon 244, Red Bear's Claw. This is a Somber DLC claw weapon that scales with primarily Strength and Dex, and it deals physical damage. This has an innate bleed buildup, luckily, because if it didn't, it would be terrible. But the bleed buildup is pretty insignificant. And the only good thing about this weapon, from my point of view, is the Ash of War, as it has the same problem where you're just lunging past the bosses most of the time. Do a charge heavy, get the first hit, and then the second hit just completely whiffs every single time. Maybe I just am terrible at positioning, I don't know. If you want to just lunge through the air, I would suggest this weapon, but if you actually want to use an OP weapon, definitely don't use this. Weapon 243, Flail. The flail is a smithing flail, surprisingly enough. And it scales with strength, dex, and it deals pure physical damage. And it's basically like the Knight Rider's flail, as you can also have double status effects on this, but this one just simply has a higher base damage. It's just a slightly better Knight Rider's flail, I would say. And you could put any Ash of War that a flail can have on it. Weapon 242, Matting Hand. The Matting Hand is a somber fist weapon that scales with strength, dex, faith, and intelligence. It has the same moveset as like Iron Balls and Star Fist and all these other amazing fist weapons. So just charge R2 this weapon over and over again, and even if the madness buildup is negligible in Elden PvE. But yeah, I would just get crazy amounts of stance breaks and just riposte over and over again. And then it was actually really good against Gideon. You could legit just unlock him with the Ash of War over and over again. Weapon 241, Clinging Bone. The Clinging Bone is a somber fist weapon that scales with strength and dex and deals only physical damage. The unique skill Lifesteal Fist only works on Gideon or any other like NPC like enemy, but in terms of bosses, really only Gideon. So that's pretty useless, but it has the same moveset as Cypherpada, so I would suggest this one-handing it and just charge attacking over and over again. But the damage was alright. Weapon 240, Knight Rider's Glaive. The Knight Rider's Glaive is a smithing halberd that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. Basically just another glaive with a little bit better damage, and you can put status effects on it. There's just simply better halberds than this. Weapon 239, Dane's Footwork. This is basically just the Miyazaki special, man. Man, he was probably creaming when he made this weapon. Feet only hitting? Oh my god. Truly goated. I know. And this is the second of the other hand-to-hand weapons. And it does only physical damage, but you could also put status effects on it. But this weapon did okay poise damage, alright physical damage. And it was quite fun to use. It just didn't blow me away. It still took quite a while for a lot of the bosses. Weapon 238, Shotel. Shotel is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and deals only physical damage. But unlike the other curved swords that are ranked, this one can actually have status effects on it. But the actual base physical damage on this weapon is pretty atrocious, so it's not very high for a curved sword. But you could at least put seppuku on it, get that extra 15% and get that extra blood buildup, you know. So it does have some synergy for it, but I would definitely suggest using other curved swords on this one. Weapon 237, Gargoyle's Black Axe. The Gargoyle Black Axe is a strength and faith based weapon that does both physical and holy damage. And like all the other black gargoyles weapons, it does holy damage. That's the main struggle. It also can't do status effects since all of the black gargoyles are somber weapons. The damage was still doing alright until you got to Malekith, and then you're like, dang, like, am I using a wet pool noodle as always, bro? But definitely should just using non-gargoyles black weapons if you're gonna use a gargoyle weapon at all. Weapon 236, Nox Flowing Hammer. This is the other Nox Flowing weapon, and the hammer is a strength-based weapon that deals physical damage, and the Ash War looks cool, don't get me wrong, but you're also not getting the Ash War off a lot, and you don't do any status effects, unfortunately. But actual like base physical damage on this weapon is pretty crazy, and considering it's a hammer and you do charge attacks, you get a lot of stance breaks, so like you don't feel like the negative effects of not having status effects too much. Weapon 235, Scepter of the All-Knowing. Gideon. Not a terrible weapon. It is a somber hammer that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and does a split physical and magic damage. And the Ash War is kind of useful, actually. I am kind of pretty useful. It has a pretty long range, and it basically just reduces people's damage negations. So you're just getting free extra damage from it. Nonetheless, no status effects, okay damage, nothing too out of the ordinary. Weapon 234, Inquisitor's Grandole. The Inquisitor's Grandole is a somber spear that scales with strength and faith and deals a physical and fire damage split while also having the innate bleed buildup. Unfortunately, its Ash War is charged forth, which is really useless. Overall, just throughout the entire playthrough, it was just doing okay damage, and the innate bleed buildup, it's pretty low, so you're not getting a lot of bleed buildups with this. Weapon 233, Swift Spear. The Swift Spear is a smithing spear that only scales with dex, so you could actually get S dex on this weapon, which is pretty cool. But my main irk with this weapon is that every single attack is a multi-hit. Like, every light attack is a double, the follow-up light attack is a triple hit. You're not able to roll when you need to, but maybe that's just skill issue, probably is. And the damage was, okay at best. I mean, it's really only for proc and status effects, I would say, with the multi-hits, but you use to your own discretion. Weapon 232, Rogier's Rapier. Rogier's Rapier is a smithing rapier, or aka thrusting sword in this game. It does a split physical and magic damage. Basically, you're just going to be using multi-hit and status effects with this weapon. You're not getting a lot of stance breaks with it, even with the charge attacks. I mean, if you put Impaling Thrust on it, maybe you'll get it more often, but a lot of it's just, strafe, poke, poke, strafe again, poke, poke, over and over again, until the boss is finally dead. Which is fun, it feels engaging, but you're not doing a whole lot of damage. Weapon 231, Bloodfiend's Sacred Spear. It is a strength, dexterity, and faith-based great spear that scales with physical and holy damage. The Ash War is just a Timu version of fucking Mogwin's Sacred Spear. And by Timu, I mean it's terrible. It's actually dog. Like, even when I hit it, which is like a 2-inch radius around me, they legit never bled. I don't really get it. But, do not use this Ash War at all. But the holy resistance on the boss later on also hurt the weapon. But it still had some strong moments with the bleed aspect of it. Weapon 230, Grafted Dragon. It is a unique strength, faith, fist weapon with fire damage. And the Ash War is visually amazing, and if you're using it on like a dragon or something, it actually hits most of the time, but a lot of the bosses just move past it, so it doesn't really work more often than not. And a lot of people hate on this weapon for no reason. I mean, the one-handing is bad, but if you get two of them, hit the NG +1, they're actually really fun to use. And they're actually pretty strong, I would say. But Weapon 229, Celebrant's Rib Rake. Is another smithing spear with the rune gain gimmick on the hit, even though, you're getting pennies on the hit. Yeah, so don't really be thinking you're going to hit the jackpot with this. But it still is a spear, and it can have status effects on it, so, I mean, it works more often than not. So, just use it as any other spear. Weapon 228, Lance. The Lance is a smithing great spear, and it scales with strength, and it does purely physical damage. You could put any Ash War that a great spear can have on this, and many others, so you can have other status effects on this weapon. I just didn't quite enjoy this weapon. I mean, it was doing okay damage, but it was just way too long. I like that it does piercing damage and all, but it just didn't feel fluid enough for me. Weapon 227, Smith Script Axe. It is an axe. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength, dex, and int, and does pure physical damage. And like all the other Smith Script weapons, the charge attack does throw the weapon, and it has all the same limitations as all the other Smith Script, but it just does significantly better, as you could actually put wild strikes on this weapon and make it really powerful with the status effects. Weapon 226, Barbed Staff Spear. It is a somber spear that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and holy damage. In the Ash of War, let's just say the Jory's Inquisition is not too powerful, I would say. If it actually allowed multiple of the rings to hit the bosses, like, more continuously, because they get hit by one, and then they have like 1 second of like iframes basically before another one can hit them. It makes no sense. But overall, just it's alright, because it actually does have bleed on it, luckily. But you could use the Ash of War to like aggro the boss from far away, even though it has like a mid-range type of effect. But it was okay. Weapon 225, Prelate's Inferno Crozier. It is a colossal weapon. It is a smithing colossal weapon that scales primarily with strength and does pure physical damage. Which is kind of crazy, you know, with Inferno in the name and everything, you would think it would do some type of fire damage. But the fire damage really only comes from the Ash of War, and the Prelate's charge only works on micro-staggerable enemies. And it takes a lot of stamina, so most of the time you're not using it. Even on Gideon, it felt like it didn't do a lot of damage. But it's still a colossal weapon, which is really strong in Elden Ring, but it's definitely one of the worse colossal weapons in the game. Weapon 224, Thorned Whip. The Thorned Whip is a smithing whip that scales with strength and dex, and it has an innate bleed, but can also have a double stats effect with the infusible Ash of Wars. Just like a lot of times, just double stats effects on the weapon. I mean, you're not gonna really be getting any stance breaks, and luckily it has a little bit of range that you could just spam light attacks over and over again. And it actually happened quite a bit. Like, I was surprised on how many stats effects I procced. Weapon 223, Hazo's Pedal Whip. It is a smithing whip that scales with strength and dex, and it's basically just a slightly better Thorned Whip, as it just does better physical damage. So that's why it's ranked higher than it. Weapon 222, Dragon Great Claw. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales primarily with strength, and it does pure physical damage. And it actually has a unique passive ability where it does extra damage against dragon type enemies. Unfortunately, I didn't fight any dragon type enemies to complete the game, as none of them are required. I mean, it still worked out as a good colossal weapon. Like, you got consistent stance breaks over and over again, just charge having this bad boy. Pretty mid of a weapon. Weapon 221, Velvet Sword of Saint Trina. It is a somber straight sword that scales with dex, strength, and int, and it does physical and magic damage, and it has the innate sleep buildup. It is also eternal sleep. In the Ash of War, Mist of the Eternal Sleep basically is just poison mist but in sleep form. So, I mean, this was only really useful against Gaskin Duo, and every other boss would just wake up immediately anyway from sleep proc. So yeah, still okay, straight sword, no status effects really besides sleep, so just really heavily relied on the physical damage aspect, which wasn't too worrying. Weapon 220, Curse Blade Cirque. It is a smithing backhand blade, and it scales with dex and does pure physical damage. It is infusible, so you could put status effects on it, and another weapon that you just spam blind spot over and over again, basically. It's probably the best Ash of War for this, and pretty decent. Weapon 219, Sword of Saint Trina. It is a somber straight sword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and it does pure physical damage. And it does a split physical and magic damage, and it has innate sleep buildup. Ash of War Mist of Slumber is exactly like the Velvet Sword of Saint Trina, except it does normal sleep, The only reason why it's over the Velvet Sword is since it just does better base physical damage. And sleep is not very powerful against many PvE bosses, so I would take the trade-off of more damage than Eternal Sleep. Weapon 218, Lettuce Sword. It is a somber light gray sword that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a physical and holy damage split. The Ashore is unique, being Needle Piercer, which is her, trademark move where she spawns like those 8 blades that converge on the person after a while, which it honestly hits a lot of the time, so it's actually pretty decent, but it does all holy damage, so most of the time it's not a huge amount of damage. But nonetheless, the light gray sword moveset is pretty cool looking. Even it sometimes can get you punished doing the follow-ups, but still a pretty decent weapon. Weapon 217, America's Hammer. It is a somber hammer that scales with strength and faith, and does a physical and holy damage split. Even though it does holy, it still is pretty good. The Asherwork Goldbreaker makes you float in the air and do a huge ground slam attack that has a huge shockwave of holy damage. And even though it does holy, I still found a lot of use cases just attacking with it. It has really good base physical damage. Weapon 216, Inseparable Sword. It is a summer great sword that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and it does a physical and holy damage split. The Asherwork Sacred Blade shoots out a projectile and boosts the holy damage, which is just more damage. And the great sword moveset is amazing. Even though it does holy, it just made the boss fight significantly longer, but the great sword still did good enough poise damage for me to get constant riposte. Weapon 215, Gargoyle's Black Blade. It is a summer greatsword that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and it does a physical and holy damage split. The Asherwork Corpse Wax Cutter does basically a vacuum slice but with black flame on it, so it's actually pretty decent in that aspect. Because it has that holy damage split, it's not very useful later on in the game. It feels strong in the beginning of the game, and as soon as you start getting to Malekith and all of them, you're just mainly focusing on getting riposte more than anything. Weapon 214, Onyx Lord's Greatsword. It is a Somber Curve Greatsword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and does a physical and magic damage split. The Asherwork Onyx Lord's Repulsion basically just thrusts your sword on the ground and creates a shockwave that knocks people back if they're light enough. Most bosses in Elden Ring, they're definitely not light enough to get pushed back, so you're just getting punished for it, and the damage is not worth it. But nonetheless, it's still a good weapon, simply because it's a curved greatsword. They're pretty OP in Elden Ring, I must say. Weapon 213, Fire Knight's Short Sword. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and it does a split physical and fire damage. It is infusible with bleed or any other status effect that you want, so it becomes very versatile in that aspect. Now that I think about it, I wonder if you put Frostbite on this weapon, if it resets automatically. I don't think so, since I don't think it does an actual animation of fire, but if it is, that would be extremely OP. But it's still a decent dagger in this game. Weapon 212, Main Gooch. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage. It does come with parry on it, which is pretty decent if you actually know how to parry, and it's actually really fun. But you can also switch it around because it is infusible. But that's to your discretion. You could keep parry on it, put bleed with it, make it real good. But pretty middle of the pack dagger, I would say. Weapon 211, Katara. It is a smithing fist weapon that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is infusible, and it's another fist weapon that has the Cypherpata moveset, so definitely more powerful if you just one-hand it. Or you could two-hand it and get better status effect build-up after you stagger them. That's usually what I would do. Weapon 210, Bloodstained Dagger. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage while having an innate bleed. It is also infusible, so you could have a double status effect. That is decent, but the innate bleed is so low that if you put another status effect, it's only 38 bleed buildup, which is pretty terrible. Like, you're almost never getting that. So that's why it's kind of like iffy to even consider it a double status effect. It's still a good dagger, especially if you want to power stance it. Weapon 209, Wakizashi. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage. It is also infusible, but I noticed with this weapon, it has a different moveset than other daggers. Like, the heavy is not like a double slash, this one's more of just a one hit. It's basically like a shortened katana almost. You're just like stabbing down, but I feel like it does significantly better poise damage because of that. So, it also has a higher base damage than most daggers, that's why it's higher up. Weapon 208, Lamenting Visage. It is a somber torch weapon that scales primarily with strength, and it does physical damage only. The Ash of War, Blindfold of Happiness, basically just works as unseen form. It just makes it harder for them to notice you. But if you upgrade this to plus 10, you get a S skill in strength, which is insane. And like you get some crazy damage, and the quick stance breaks with this weapon, like it just works really well. So I gotta say, this is probably like one of the best torches in the entire game. Weapon 207, Glintstone Chris. It is another somber dagger that scales with dex and int, and does a physical and magic damage split. The actual Glintstone Dart basically is like the Glintstone Pebble, but you can also follow it up with a lunging attack. I didn't really do the lunging attack too much in my gameplay. The ability to like re-aggro bosses through the charge attack was pretty well, and I could just spam light attacks on them. All in all, like, the damage was pretty respectable for a dagger. Weapon 206, Spear. The spear is a smithing spear that scales with strength and dex, and it does pure physical damage. Since it's the normal spear, you could put status effects on it. And so, just use it like a spear, basically. Power stance it, light attack with it. Can't really go wrong with this, it's pretty mediocre. Weapon 205, Warpick. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage. See, when I first grabbed this weapon, I thought it was going to be massive. Now, I didn't realize it was going to be a normal hammer. I was expecting pickaxe type of size. But I was very much mistaken. But nonetheless, you could put in infusions on it. So, basically use that as a normal hammer. It also has that piercing damage, so it is better in that aspect. Weapon 204, Iron Spear. It is a smithing spear that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage. And it's just like the spear with better damage, and you can infuse it. Nothing out of the ordinary. Weapon 203, Spike Spear. It is a smithing spear that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage with a innate bleed, but it's also infusible, so you gotta have a double status proc. So just like the other spears, just with double status procs. Weapon 202, Bloodfiend's Fork. It is a smithing spear that scales with strength, dex, and arc, and it does physical damage with innate bleed, and it's also infusible. See, with this weapon, it's a little bit more versatile, because you could simply upgrade the arc and get higher bleed damage, or you could just infuse it with a double status proc, and that also works. So, other than that, just another run-of-the-mill spear. Weapon 201, Pike. It is another smithing spear that scales with strength and dex, and it does pure physical damage. This one just has slightly better damage output than the other spears. It's also infusible to put status effects on it if you really wanted to. Weapon 200, Partisan. It is another smithing spear that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage, and it simply just does better damage than the pike. Weapon 199, Morningstar. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and dex, and it does pure physical damage with innate bleed. You could also have a double status effects with this since it's infusible, but it's just decent in itself due to the hammer having great stance breaks. So add double status effects to it, pretty decent. Weapon 198, Monk's Flame Blade. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. This weapon is also infusible to have any type of status effect that you want. Crazily enough, this does not have any fire damage. I was kind of expecting, with Flame Blade in it, it would have some type of fire damage, but it really doesn't. But nonetheless, it is a curved greatsword. You could have status effects on it. It's pretty run of the mill, Weapon 197, Dueling Shield. It is a smithing thrusting shield that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is also infusible, because if it wasn't, this would be terrible. But the guard counters on this weapon is actually really good. Does good stance damage. Stamina isn't too much since it actually counts as a shield, and you actually don't take too much damage. I use this on my shield only randomizer, and it was actually really good. Put frostbite on it, worked really well. So don't hate on it until you try it, man. Just don't do the running heavy, it's terrible. Weapon 196, Vike's War Spear. It is a somber great spear that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a split of physical and fire damage and has innate madness build bleed up. The Astral War Frenzy Flame Thrust throws you up in the air and makes you do a landing attack that causes a huge area of effect of fire damage, but it also procs madness if you land in it. However, madness in this game is quite literally useless, so unless you're going against Gideon. So that's why it's a S tier weapon. I'm just kidding. But honestly, it just wasn't very powerful through and through. Weapon 195, Shadow Sunflower Blossom. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength and faith, and it does physical damage. It also does holy damage on the Astral War, which is chainable into multiple attacks. But the Astral War takes so long that you're not really getting many chaining attacks. But it being a colossal weapon does great stance damage, so that's a good part of it. Weapon 194, Troll's Hammer. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and fire damage. The Astral War Troll's Roar is practically useless in every PvE fight for major bosses. Like the first part, you can't knock away any of the large bosses, and then you're gonna get hit out of it because it doesn't give you any hyper armor to do the follow-up attack. So it does better physical damage than other colossal weapons. That's why it's just simply higher than them. Weapon 193, Envoy's Greathorn. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a physical and holy damage split. Oh my god, I'm gonna butcher this. Great Oracular Bubble. It just creates a huge bubble, and it does pretty bad damage, and it moves so slow. But nonetheless, it still does decent physical damage, even throughout the late game. Just because you're getting stance breaks so many times, you don't even really notice it. Weapon 192, Battle Hammer. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. It is also infusible, so it's just a significantly better hammer than the previous ones just because of the physical damage aspect. Other than that, it's nothing special. Weapon 191, Alabaster Lord Sword. It is a somber greatsword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It has a physical and magic damage split. And the Astral War Alabaster Lord's pull is legit just the opposite of Onyx Lord's greatsword. It legit just pulls them in instead of repulsing them. Which, it's still pretty useless. Not even pretty, it is useless against bosses. So, it just has better damage. Plain and simple. Weapon 190, Ancient Meteoric or Greatsword. That's all it owes. It is a summer colossal sword that scales with strength and arc. It does pure physical damage, and the Asher War is unique, being White Light Charge, which is a 2-hit attack where the first one does a light speed type lunging attack, and then the second part of it does an explosion. And surprisingly, it doesn't do lightning damage, even though it looks electrifying. But nonetheless, it's still a decent weapon. Didn't find much use of the Asher War, as it just did significantly worse damage than just doing a normal like charge attack or something like that. Weapon 189, Rune's Greatsword. It is a Summer Colossal Sword that scales with Strength and Int, and does a split damage of physical and magic. The Asher War Wave of Destruction is actually pretty useful a lot of the time, as you could just do it from far away, and then most of the time the boss would just run into it and just get free damage and free stance pressure. And it being a Colossal Sword, it also just did great stance in general. I could just light attack over and over and still get stance breaks. But when compared to other ones, it's just pretty lacking in the damage department. Weapon 188, Run Crystal Sword. It is a Summer Straight Sword that scales with Strength, Dex, and Intelligence. It does a split of physical and magic damage, and it has the innate Scalar Rot effect, which is the only thing that's good, you know. I mean, the Crystal Sword, in this way, I didn't really notice too much of a bad damage differential, but the added Rot really helped it a lot, I would say. Weapon 187, Castus. It is a smithing fist weapon that scales with Strength and Dex, but it is infusible to have any status effect. The cool thing about the Castus is that the charge attack, it's different than all the other fist weapons, and it does like a multi-hit. I'm usually not a big fan of multi-hits, but the Castus, I think it did it well because it only relates to one attack pattern. Like every other attack, it could be a one hit, but if you do a charge heavy and then do the follow-up, that's 5 attacks and quick status procs off. Weapon 186, Eleanor's Pole Blade. It is a Summer Twin Blade that scales with Dex and Arc, and does a split physical and fire damage. It also has innate bleed. See, some people might be, angry that it's here, but for PvE, I just did not find a lot of use for this weapon. Like, even with power stancing and doing charge heavies, it's just like the 45 bleed is so bad. And the Blood Blade dance, like, I don't even know when you could get the full thing off. Like, you're just getting punished every time you do it against a boss. I mean, nonetheless, it is a pole blade. You still get status effects off every once in a while with this weapon. Weapon 185, Cane Sword. It is a smithing straight sword that scales with Dex and Strength, and does pure physical damage and is infusible. I mean, there's not really much to say. It just felt like a significantly worse straight sword than most, while being able to have status effects on it. Weapon 184, Short Sword. It is a smithing straight sword that scales with Strength and Dex and does pure physical damage. It is also infusible. Just like the cane sword, it's just basically another straight sword that does less damage, just a little bit more than the cane sword. So that's why it's just a little bit over it. Weapon 183, Steel Wire Torch. It is a somber torch that scales with Strength and Dex and does a physical and fire damage split. The Asher War Fire Breather is not very useful. Let me just tell you that now. Sure, it has like a little bit of a range to it, but you're like stuck in the animation for 4 seconds and you're just gonna get hit out of it. And it does not do a lot of damage. And also, why is this Steel Wire Torch not doing bleed? Like, why do we even have a separate one for Steel Wired to a regular torch? I don't really get it, but yeah. Weapon 182, Nagakiba. It is a smithing katana that scales with Strength and Dex. It does pure physical damage with an innate bleed buildup. You can also infuse it to have a double status proc. I just found that it takes a lot more stamina than other katanas. Or maybe I'm just hallucinating, but I feel like I would get punished way more often for the same amount of moves I would do with other katanas. But it's still really good, especially if you use Unsheath and Relina's cameo. Chef's kiss. Weapon 181, Serpentbone Blade. It is a somber katana that scales with Dex and does pure physical damage with an innate poison bleed buildup. The Asher War Double Slash is kind of similar to its charged heavy, It does a double slash, but if you continuously press the Ash of War, it does like a 6-hit combo. So it actually procs really fast. It actually does higher damage than a lot of the other katanas. Weapon 180, Hand of Millennia. It is a somber katana that scales with dex and does pure physical damage, and it also has an innate bleed aspect. The Ash of War Waterfowl Dance is, as you expect, the Waterfowl Dance. Except it's significantly worse since you could actually get hit out of it, unlike Millennia over here, unfortunately. I mean, you wouldn't really get the Waterfowl Dance off, like, at all, but still did good bleed and physical damage to bosses. Weapon 179, Vulgar Militia Saw. It is a smithing halberd that scales with strength and dex and does a pure physical damage. And it has an innate bleed buildup, but it's also infusible to have a double status proc. I mean, there's not really much to say about this weapon. It's legit just a saw at the end of a stick, and you can get double status procs off it. It worked well. I mean, not much to say besides that. Weapon 178, Banished Knight's Halberd. It is a smithing halberd that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is infusible with any halberd type moveset and can have status effects applied to it. I mean, it's basically like the other halberds, it just has higher damage output than them. Weapon 177, Freya's Greatsword. It is a somber greatsword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. You could apply any status effect, and as it is infusible. There's not much to really talk about this weapon, just another greatsword. I thought it would be some type of somber weapon, being it's from Freya, but I mean, you could just apply anything to it. And it does pretty decent physical damage, so just a better greatsword than some of them. Weapon 176, Omen Cleaver. It is a smithing curved greatsword that scales with strength and dex. It does pure physical damage and it's infusible. And just about like every other curved greatsword, it just does slightly better damage and same exact moveset, same exact infusibility. So it just ranks slightly higher than the rest of the curved greatswords. Weapon 175, Celeria's Tree. It is a somber great spear that does strength, dex, and faith scaling, and it has a split physical and holy damage. I was actually quite surprised with this weapon. I thought it was going to be much worse, just because of the holy damage, but the Ash of War Celeria's Woe actually does decent damage, even if it's just holy. Like, you just charge it up, boom, it does like 1,000. It's actually pretty crazy. But other than that, no status effects, just pure physical damage. The charge attacks feel pretty fluid throughout the fight, so felt pretty nice. Weapon 174, Cranial Vessel Candlestick. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength and faith. It does a split physical and fire damage. Now this weapon's pretty alright as long as you just don't decide to go fight Moog with it. But the Ash of War pretty useless unless you're doing crowd control. It just shoots like fire rocks around you, and I don't even know if it does good poise damage. It probably doesn't, as most of the rocks aren't hitting. But nonetheless, it is a colossal weapon, so you could get good stance damage from that. But there is no status effects on it. Weapon 173, Forked Greatsword. It is a smithing greatsword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage while having an innate bleed. It's also infusible to have a double status proc, and even with the double status proc, the bleed is still pretty high, so you can actually get it pretty consistently. Yep, another greatsword that has a double status proc. Weapon 172, Hammer. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. It is infusible. There's really not much to say. I mean, hammer is a decent, weapon category within Elden Ring, and accordingly, the hammer is pretty decent. That's why it's a pretty middle of the pack here. Weapon 171, Golden Halberd. It is a somber halberd that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a physical and holy damage split. And the Ash of War Golden Vow just gives you free extra damage. And it's actually really obtainable early on. You just have to kill that one tree sentinel at the beginning, Yeah, it's just another halberd with a free buff at the beginning. It's pretty decent. Unfortunately, you can't have any status effects on it, but still does pretty good damage nonetheless. Weapon 170, Veteran's Prosthesis. It is a somber fist weapon that scales with strength and dex, and does a physical and lightning damage split. The Astral War Storm Kick is a 2-attack Astral War, where the first one does like a little wind attack, and then the follow-up does the kicking lightning attack. But it's kind of a long attack, so you're not really getting the follow-up too much. But it's also the Cypherpada moveset, so you could just one hand and get free stance breaks over and over. And the lightning damage also helps with like Elden Beast and Morgott, so it also benefits from those. Weapon 169, Lucerin. It is a smithing halberd that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. The good thing about this, all the physical damage comes from piercing attacks, so you could just use Spear Talisman and get free damage buff instantly. And it's also infusible to have status effects, which is kind of crazy. It has like kind of like a spear moveset basically. It's kind of odd that it's labeled as a halberd. Weapon 168, Magma Blade. It is a somber curved sword that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a split physical and fire damage. It does like a spinning slash move that just spreads magma on the ground. Unfortunately, the magma does not last long at all. You know, for a weapon that you have to grind so much for, I was really hoping for better damage. But I guess there's quite a few bosses that are significantly, deterrent to fire. But it's still very powerful being a curved sword and all. Just, power stance, jump attacks over and over and, win game. Weapon 167, Giza's Wheel. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. The Astral War Spinning Wheel basically just turns on the wheel and get to chainsawing everybody down. The weapon would be so much better if the tick speed of the Astral War was better than it is. It like only ticks 1 every 0.5 seconds. It's kind of annoying. But you could still get good bleed procs off this, as it does have bleed on it. Weapon 166, Rotten Great Axe. The smithing great axe that scales with strength and does physical damage with innate Scarlet Rot. You can infuse it with bleed and have a Scarlet Rot and bleed build, which is kind of crazy. But the actual stance damage from great axes are pretty good, and it's pretty quick for being a great axe. That's the good thing about great axes, the light attacks are so quick. Weapon 165, Lord's Horn Straight Sword. It is a smithing straight sword that does strength and dex scaling and does pure physical damage. Basically just another straight sword. It happens a lot with these weapon categories that have like 20 weapons. They're all basically the same, some have slightly better damage, and this is one of them. Weapon 164, Long Sword. It is a smithing straight sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. Just like the Lord's Horn Straight Sword, just slightly better damage, fully infusible. Weapon 163, Hand Axe. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. It is infusible, and the hand axe actually goes crazy with light attacks. They're so fast. I love axes for that specific reason. And it also does deal decent stance damage with charge attacks. And you better put wild strikes on this. Weapon 162, Broadsword. It is a smithing straight sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. What a surprise. Another straight sword that legit does nothing unique. I mean, it just does more damage, guys. Like, you're gonna see a very common theme with a lot of these weapons. Weapon 161, Ice Shrine Hatchet. It is a somber axe that has strength and dex scaling and does pure physical damage with innate frost buildup. Now, if y'all know about this back in the day, bro, Hoarfrost Stomp used to be so OP. Like, it would do like thousands of damage every single one, but now they nerfed it to hell. But you could still proc Frost pretty fast with it. That's the only good thing. And with it being an axe, you could just get consistently good damage with it. Weapon 160, Forked Tongue Hatchet. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and dex It does pure physical damage with an innate bleed also. However, it is not infusible, surprisingly. It is a smithing weapon that cannot be infused, unfortunately, which really hinders the greatness of this weapon because the Astral War absolutely sucks ass, and the bleed build-up's only like 45, so you're kind of just stuck with a minimal amount of bleed, but a decent amount of physical damage. And at least it looks cool too. I'll give it that. Weapon 159. Ghost Flame Torch. It is a smithing torch that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a physical and magic damage split, and it's really useful for like burst damage purposes. It's probably the best torch in this game, simply because it just does frostbite, man. What other torch does actually decent stats effect? None. So I would definitely suggest using this torch if you're going to use any. Weapon 158. Dragon Scale Blade. It is a somber katana that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage. It also has an innate frost proc. Frost proc, the Astral War Ice Lightning Sword, basically applies like a grease to the weapon that allows it to do frost proc. It's pretty fun to use. It's pretty easy to get the lightning effect off, and it's another katana that's really good. Weapon 157. Sword of Night. It is a somber katana that scales with strictly dex, and does a split damage of physical and magic. It does have an innate bleed buildup, which I'm pretty sure almost every katana does besides like Serpent Bow Blade. But the Astral War Witching Hour Slash is basically like a mini waterfowl almost, except you're not really in the air. But it looks really cool. Everything is like a full black slash, but it's also not the best katanas. Weapon 156. Gargoyle's Great Axe. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. It is fully infusible. Okay, now we're getting into the better Gargoyle's weapons since they don't do any holy damage. I mean, it's another great axe that you could put bleed on, and this one just does better physical damage. Better, same amount of stance break as a regular great axe, you know. Weapon 155. Gargoyle's Halberd. It is a smithing halberd that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage and is fully infusible. Nothing really to say besides better physical damage than the other halberds, and you could put bleed on it. Weapon 154. Bolt of Grandsex. It is a somber spear that scales with strength and dex and does physical and lightning damage. The Astral War Ancient Lightning Spear. You could either charge it or uncharge it. It just changes the amount of damage it does. It's pretty decent. The high dex requirement is kind of crazy though. The actual spear aspect, not being able to do any status effects, is kind of annoying. You're still getting good dex qualities from the weapon. Weapon 153. Crescent Moon Axe. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage, and is fully infusible. Nothing really changed from all the other great axes besides just doing better damage. All the stance breaks, all the good stuff about great axes are still in here. Weapon 152. Sword of Milos. It is a somber greatsword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. The most exciting about this thing is doing the quest line of Dung Eater. The Astral War Shriek of Milos basically gives the people around you a damage negation and also changes your charge heavy. I mean, I wish it didn't change my charge heavy because I don't want to be hitting someone 3 times because I'm going to just get smacked the hell out of. It's still a good weapon, especially against like Elden Beast. It's so much better because you just get that free damage negation, but still a decent greatsword nonetheless. Weapon 151. Maria's Executioner Sword. It is a somber greatsword that scales with strength, dex, and arc. It does a split physical and magic damage. However, you cannot infuse it, but I mean, if you put the right build, the Astral War does its job. That multi-hit build on this is kind of crazy. That's really all you should be doing, just using the skewer attack over and over again. You're getting free a lot of physical damage off this. Weapon 150. Rotten Battle Hammer. It is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and does pure physical damage while having an innate Scarlet Rot. You can also infuse this to have a double status proc. The Great Hammer moveset, I just never really got used to it. It's still decent, but I prefer the regular hammer moveset. But nonetheless, you're gonna get good damage from this either way. Weapon 149, Rapier. It is a smithing thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage, only pierce by the way, and it's also infusible with other status effects. This weapon is just good because, like every thrusting sword, is doing pierce damage already, and it's really quick to get those status procs off, so it's just slightly better. And it's higher than Rajier's Rapier just because it does better physical damage. Weapon 148, Chainlink Flail. It is a smithing flail that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage and has an innate bleed buildup. This is the best flail in the game, so if you want to do a flail playthrough, use the Chainlink Flail. Because you could get that double status proc off, and you could just spam light attacks. It's pretty decent. But besides that, flails are pretty still bad category altogether. Weapon 147, Carrion Thrusting Shield. It is a smithing thrusting shield that scales with strength, dex, and int, and does a split physical and magic damage. It is infusible. Basically a 1-to-1 copy of the dueling shield, just slightly better damage. Weapon 146, Rotten Staff. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength and does pure physical damage while having an innate Scarlet Rot effect. However, you cannot change the Asher War on this weapon, so you're kind of just stuck with a colossal weapon with Scarlet Rot. Luckily, this colossal weapon's really good at stance breaking and doing massive amounts of damage at once. It just takes a long time for every hit. Weapon 145, Euphoria. It is a somber twin blade that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and holy damage. I would not recommend using this Ash War a lot because the whole mechanic of this, the more you attack with it, the higher your damage gets buffed. But when you use your Ash War, you get rid of that damage buff. And the entire Asher War does only holy damage, so it's really not going to do a lot. But if you get like a stance break, go for it. You're going to get some good damage either way. Weapon 144, Gargoyle's Black Blades. It is a somber twin blade with strength, dex, and faith scaling. It does a physical and holy split. Although it does that holy damage, me just power stancing with these weapons still worked really well, even late game. I didn't really even notice it. However, you can't change it to have bleed, which is very unfortunate. But still a very decent just jump and attack, brain dead move, Weapon 143, Troll's Golden Sword. It is a smithing colossal sword that scales with strength and does pure physical damage while being fully infusible. I mean, with the golden and the name, I was expecting some holy damage, which I was very thankful not to see. So this weapon is just a really good colossal sword if you want to use one of those and put any type of infusion on it. Weapon 142, Moonveil. It is a somber katana that scales with dex and int and does a split physical and magic damage. It already has an innate bleed buildup, and the Ash War Transient Moonlight is just basically unsheath, which extended range from the magic attack. So you could also put Relena's cameo on this and Shard of Alexander and Miguchi. But magic damage, the split, it's kind of iffy with a lot of bosses. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It's better to just have, just plain physical damage. But you also can't go wrong with it. It's the Moonveil. Weapon 141, Starline Sword. It is a somber katana that scales with dex and int and does a physical and magic damage split. The Ash War Starline Slash, I'm kind of not a huge fan of it. It does like a multi-slash attack, but it feels like it doesn't do a lot of damage. And more often than not, I felt like just light attacking to get that extra, and I felt like just like light attacking to get the extra hits in for bleed was better more often than to use the Ash War, because I'm not sure if it actually even counts toward bleed since it's all magic damage really. Weapon 140, the Falx. It is a somber, curved sword that scales with dex and does pure physical damage. It also has an innate bleed buildup. It's really hard to get off the Ash War Revenger's Blade just because it's like an 8-hit attack if you do the follow-up. And it really, don't get me wrong, it does amazing damage. But in most PvE bosses, you're really not getting that off. But luckily, it's already a dual-wield curved sword, just having one of them, so. Weapon 139, Highland Axe. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is fully infusible. Just another axe, you know. If it's lower, it does less physical damage, basically. There's nothing really too crazy about these axes. They're just reskinned and slapped with a new name and called it a day. Number 138, Celebrant's Cleaver. It is another smithing axe that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage, which can be infused with bleed. I mean, it's another axe, but you get 10 runes per hit. Wowzers. We're really making it up in the world, you know what I mean? But I mean, every axe in general is pretty decent in this game, I'm not gonna lie. Weapon 137, Battle Axe. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and does pure physical damage, which is also infusible with bleed and any other status effects. And what do you expect? It's another axe that just does better damage. Weapon 136, Mesmer Soldier's Axe. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. Wow, man. Another axe, but it's from Mesmer, so obviously it has to be better, you know. It's Mesmer Soldier, so it's higher on the list, guys. You feel me? Of course you feel me. Weapon 135, Jawbone Axe. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. See, I almost tricked y'all. Y'all thought it was going to be another axe. Well, it technically is, but it's not axe category. But this one also is another great axe that you could just put bleed on, get wild strikes, and go crazy, basically. Weapon 134, Warped Axe. It's a smithing axe that scales with strength and does physical damage only. It is also infusible. We're back to the schedule programming. Wowzers. At least this one looks cool. It's warped and all of that. But there's really not much difference in between axes, just one being slightly more damaged than the other. Weapon 133, Executioner's Great Axe. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. See, this one looked very cool. I was not expecting it to be a great axe though. It looked, I don't even know what category, it's like on a huge stick basically. But it still did decent damage. It's a decent damage that could have bleed on it. It's another one of those. Weapon 132, Greatsword of Damnation. It is a somber greatsword that scales with strength, dex, and faith. It does a physical and holy damage split. This weapon would have been much lower if it did not touch Gideon the way it does. Oh my god. I'm ecstatic the way it does Gideon every single day. I actually just like, I have it as my screen wallpaper at this point, bro. I just be scrolling, I'm like, oh my god, yes. Penetrate Gideon with all those spikes. Please do again. But not for real. I mean, throughout the whole fight, I didn't even really notice a huge drop off from the holy damage. And it just touches Gideon good. Weapon 131, Great Knife. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It also has an innate bleed build, and you can also infuse it to have a double status proc. But nonetheless, the actual physical damage aspect is not the highest. And the bleed build, it only has 38. I don't know any boss, unless you're doing a +0 run. I don't feel like any boss you're really getting a lot of bleeds off that. But yeah, it's just another dagger with the double status. Weapon 130, Parrying Dagger. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. Now the main thing that I don't get about this weapon, why is there a parrying dagger but you could change the Ash of War to not be parry? So why am I gonna have a parrying dagger that has crack blade on it and not be able to parry? It should be a somber weapon or some shit, and you get extra iframes on the parry or something. You know, I'm just throwing out ideas from Soft, hiring me or something. Weapon 129, Dagger. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. See, this is only higher than the other daggers because it does better damage, especially parrying dagger. It's basically the parrying dagger that has better damage. You could legit just put parry on this dagger and call it a day. Weapon 128, Bloodhound's Claws. It is a smithing claws that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage with innate bleed buildup. You are also able to infuse this with a double proc, and with claws, it's actually pretty OP to have that double proc. It just applies so quickly. Weapon 127, Scorpion Stinger. It is a somber dagger that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage while also applying rot. Now, I was kind of surprised with this weapon. At first I thought it was fire for some reason, but then the Scarlet Rot, I guess I could appreciate Scarlet Rot more since the daggers didn't do as much as other Scarlet Rot weapons. But like, I felt like I killed bosses really quickly with this weapon. Clean Rot Knight Sword. It is a smithing thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. And as with all thrusting sword, it does pure piercing damage. And you can also apply bleed and other status effects to this weapon. Weapon 125. Monk's Flame Mace. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and does physical and fire damage. It is infusable to have bleed and other status effects on it. And you can also put like Crag Blade or Ronite's Resolve with it. Weapon 124. Guardian Sword Spear. It is a smithing halberd that scales with dex and does pure physical damage and can be infusible. Now, is this shit having like an identity crisis? Cause why is it a sword, a spear, and a halberd all at the same time? Still a decent weapon, you know, just put on Ice Spear with this, as with like almost every other halberd and spear. And it's just an Ice Spear user. It's so good. Weapon 123. Mace. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. It is also infusible. I mean, it's basically every other hammer, but as in a mace form. Mace just does better damage. Weapon 122. Godskin Stitcher. It is a smithing heavy thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is also infusible, but already defaults with impaling thrust, so, you know, not really much to infuse with that. But, I mean, all heavy thrusting swords are, like, pretty decent, like, pretty high level. It's a great category. The Godskin Stitcher just happens to come in last of them. Weapon 121. Sword Lance. It is a smithing heavy thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is infusible, just a slightly better Godskin Stitcher, slightly more damage. Weapon 120. Morgoth's Cursed Sword. It is a somber curved greatsword, and it does purely physical damage while also having an innate bleed buildup. While the base bleed is really bad at the beginning, if you put some arcane into it, it actually gets a lot better. And the Blood Slice Ash of War actually does pretty decent damage, and it doesn't take too long to actually cast it. Since it's broken up in between two, you can do one and stay pretty safe, but if it like staggers, you could continue it and do another pretty decent attack. Weapon 119. Queline's Greatsword. It is a somber heavy thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does a split physical and fire damage. It is infusible, so you could change the skill from Impelling Thrust to other heavy thrusting sword type Ash of Wars to get bleed on them, but Impelling Thrust by itself is really good. Other than that, it's another heavy thrusting sword that you could just put infusions on. Weapon 118. Falling Star Beastjaw. It is a Somber Coloss weapon that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a physical and magic damage split. You cannot infuse this weapon, and it comes with Gravity Bolt, which is not that useful to say the least. This weapon actually used to be crazy good with the Ash of War, but not anymore. The stance damage on this is still really insane, so. Weapon 117. Great Axe. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. It is infusible with any status effect, and it does pretty crazy damage. Much better than a lot of the other great axes. Weapon 116. Rose's Axe. It is a somber axe that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. See, I was expecting this weapon to be much worse than it was, simply because of the Ash of War. Because like the spell Rose's like summons is absolutely terrible. Like when you actually like hit down the weapon, it like micro staggers like Gideon, so it actually hits all of them. And it also, like, if you're not just trying to use the summons, like hit the boss and then dodge around, it's still gonna get the hits in. So overall, it was a pretty decent weapon and pretty high damage as well. Weapon 115. Moonrathel's Night Sword. It is a somber colossal sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It does a split physical and magic damage. In the Ashwar Tremendous Phalanx, it just summons like a huge glintstone blade over, and it does pretty good stance damage, not gonna lie. And plus, you could just like cast it in the middle of their attacks and just get free hits in over and over again. So it actually like helped really a lot. Even without having status effects, it was still a really good weapon. Weapon 114, Royal Greatsword. It is a somber colossal sword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and does a physical and magic damage split while having innate frost. And the Ashwar Wolf's Assault basically just like lunges you towards him, and then it does like a mini explosion when he brings the sword back up, and it does a lot of frost damage. So it's pretty decent. Weapon 113, Stormhawk Axe. It is a somber axe that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage, but it gets added lightning damage when you use the Ashwar. And the Ashwar Thunderstorm, it's legit so easy to cast. I mean, you could like do it near the boss, you could do it before you even fight the boss to get the free lightning damage. I mean, you're like almost always gonna have the lightning damage buff added, no matter what. Weapon 112, Sword of Night and Flame. It is a somber straight sword, scaling with strength, dex, intelligence, and faith, and it does a split physical, magic, and fire. This one is terrible in terms of scaling, so like you're not gonna get massive damage from any specific part of the scaling, but it all works really well, especially if you're using the Astral War correctly. Like you could use that for different. It's very versatile, I should say. Like you could use the magic part of the Astral War on magic. When bosses have low magic resistance, just use the magic part, and when bosses have low fire resistance, just use the fire part of it. Weapon 111, Bonnie Butchering Knife. It is a somber great axe that scales with strength and does pure physical damage. The honing Astral War of this is quite terrible. Like, sure, it adds a little bit more damage and lifesteal to the weapon, but like, what's the point of lifesteal if you're never gonna hit, right, guys? And plus, the Butchering Knife already has base lifesteal, so you're just slightly increasing it. And not having the ability to have infusions on this just makes the weapon worse than it really is. Weapon 110, Meteoric Ore Blade. It is a somber katana that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. It does a physical and magic damage split while also having an innate bleed. But the Astral War, absolutely terrible. Gravitas, like throw that thing away, you're never using it. Like, terrible. But it's actually still really good in damage and bleed, surprisingly. Weapon 109, Spike Castus. It is a smithing fist weapon that scales with strength and dex. It has an innate bleed buildup. So basically it's just Castus with the ability to have double status effects, basically. This entire weapon is just Castus with double status proc, so it's significantly better than a lot of other weapons. Weapon 108, Pada. It is a smithing fist weapon that scales with dex and does strictly physical damage. However, it is infusible to have other status procs on it. And it's actually quite long, like no diddy. Like, it's actually surprisingly like long in length, so the range is actually pretty good on this weapon. Yeah, it's just another fist weapon like Cypher Pada, and get good stance damage on it. Weapon 107, Ordovis Greatsword. It is a somber greatsword that scales with strength and faith and does a split damage of physical and holy. Now the main good thing about this weapon is its Astral War, which is Ordovis's Vortex. And if you just charge that thing up, even though you may not get it off a lot of times, you get that off, oh my god, the stance damage is crazy. And the damage in general is just crazy. So, yeah, just even though you're not gonna get any status procs, it's just pure overpowerment with the stance damage. Weapon 106, Obsidian Lamina. It is a somber reaper with scalings of strength, dex, and arcane. It does purely physical damage while having innate bleed. Now this weapon I gotta say is one of the most fun weapons I ever used in my life. You legit just spam Astral War and you just back out, and then you do another follow through attack over and over. It's so fun. You don't even need to dodge. 100% would recommend using this weapon if you want to look flashy. Weapon 105, Warhawk's Talon. It is a smithing straight sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is another straight sword that you could just put infusible bleed on it. It also has a unique attack, if I remember. Like, the dual wielding of the Warhawk Talons felt different than regular straight swords, but not in a bad way. It felt pretty fluid in a sense, and it worked really well. Just put seppuku on it. Weapon 104, the Cicada. It is a somber dagger that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. Even though it's a somber one, like, the damage on this is actually crazy. Like, I think I was getting like consistently 1,000 damage like every charge heavy or some crazy thing. I don't even remember, but I just remember shredding through bosses. Weapon 103, Black Knife. It is a somber dagger that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and holy damage. The Ashawar Blade of Death actually does do black flame, so it does a percentage based. So if you're doing NG plus 1,000, you probably gotta have this weapon if you want another black flame weapon. But the actual damage wasn't too bad. It actually worked really well against Elden Beasts as well. Weapon 102, Uchi Katana. It is a smithing katana that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage while having an innate blade. But just like the Naga, you could also have, just like many other katanas, you could have double status effects on it. So it makes it really useful. And then with the double status, you could also have the Relina's cameo and Shard of Alexander combo with Unsheath. Really OP, gotta say. Weapon 101, Grave Scythe. It is a smithing reaper that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage while having innate bleed, and you can also have a double status proc with this. This is the best scythe there is in the game. Absolutely goated. Weapon 100, Dismounter. It is a smithing curved greatsword scaling with strength and dex and does purely physical attack. It is infusible with any status effect that you want, but as another curved sword, it just does good damage and it's wonderful. Weapon 99, Smith Script Great Hammer. It is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and does purely physical damage. The last of the smithing weapons, surprisingly. But with the charge heavy, when you're doing the spin, it actually counts as multiple hits. So if you put status effects on it, it's going to happen a lot quicker. And you could also just go absolutely crazy with like Lion's Claw or even like Royal Knight's Resolve. There's so many different build possibilities with this. Weapon 98, Beastman's Cleaver. It is a smithing curved greatsword that scales with strength and deals strictly physical damage. It is infusible, and if I suggest anything, I would say Wild Strikes. Wild Strikes, I gotta say, it's gotta be one of the greatest Ashawars in the game. Especially on like curved greatswords, it just goes absolutely belligerent, no lie. And Beastman's Cleaver is a pretty, like, it's a slightly higher tier curved greatsword than a lot of others, but it actually works really well. Weapon 97, Dragon King's Cragblade. It is a somber heavy thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex, and it does a split damage of physical and lightning. Now this weapon does massive damage, especially in water because of the lightning damage. And the Ashawar, it can also micro stagger people. Like, the actual cloud around you is counting as a hitbox, so you could just charge it up and then hit them through it. And also has an uncharged version, which is like instantly like hitting the ground, but it doesn't do as much damage. But it is a really good weapon. Weapon 96, Spiked Club. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and does strictly physical damage while having innate bleed. This is one of the clubs that don't usually have a club moveset, which is kind of odd. But it wasn't like necessarily bad, it was just not as quick. But you could put double status on this and Wild Strikes and not even have to use the actual attacks. So like, it doesn't really affect it too much. Still amazing poise damage and everything. Weapon 95, Lizard Greatsword. It is a somber greatsword that does strength and dex scaling while doing strictly physical damage. And you can infuse this with other Ashawars, which I would suggest, because if you do bleed, the actual mini projectile part of the charge heavy, or actually any heavy, actually counts towards the bleed proc, so it actually works very well. And it's actually really unique with that fact. You could actually just, spam heavy and continue the poise damage proc. Weapon 94, Stone Club. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and dex and does strictly physical damage. Just another club. Goes absolutely crazy with the poise damage. You could put status effects on this. Wild strikes, whatever you gotta do. But just another great damage dealing weapon. Weapon 93, Lordsworn's Greatsword. It is a smithing greatsword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage while also having a pierce attack. You could also put status effects on this. Another greatsword. It has the ability to do both standard and pierce attack, so it's actually really good in that aspect. It's very versatile. But you could just put like Giant's Hunt and go crazy over and over. Just another greatsword like that. Weapon 92, Knight's Greatsword. It is a smithing greatsword that scales with strength and dex, doing purely physical damage. Another greatsword. You could also do piercing and standard attacks, and you could also change the status effect, just slightly better damage than other greatswords in this category. Weapon 91, Celebrant's Skull. It is a smithing great hammer that scales with both strength and dex and does purely physical damage. With great hammer, you just put wild strikes on it, put bleed on it, go crazy, and you just get instant stance breaks. I mean, there's a huge meta in Elden Ring. Obviously, they don't really change it too much. Even so, and it shows with these great hammers just going crazy with wild strikes. Weapon 90, Blacksteel Twin Blade. It is a smithing twin blade that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and holy damage. You can add an infusion onto this weapon to have bleed, which is amazing since it's a twin blade. Just get two of them, double bleed, or you could do bleed cold and get a double like that. Just power stance it, go crazy. The holy damage does set it apart from other twin blades, which make it worse, but still a really good weapon. Weapon 89, Zweihander. It is a smithing colossal sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage, and it is infusible. It is one of the better colossal swords, and I know a lot of people love this weapon, so maybe they're a little bit angry it's not more towards the top, but there's definitely better colossal swords than this. Weapon 88, Relana's Twin Blades. It is a somber, light greatsword that scales with strength, dex, intelligence, and faith, and it does a damage split of physical, magic, and fire. But these swords are actually really good. I love the paired light greatsword moveset, bro. It's just so fluid. You're always seems like you're attacking. And the Asher War, I mean, it's basically like a Sonaf, but more useful, I guess, and more flashy. Weapon 87, Scimitar. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It is infusible and definitely infusible with Seppuku and just do jump power stance attacks. As with almost every other curved sword on this list. Holy. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of repeats. Weapon 86, Flowing Curved Sword. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage. It is infusible. Put the bleed, put the seppuku, go crazy, Lord's Blood Execution, wonderful build, claw, everything. I mean, that's what the curved swords are all about, straight bleed procs. Weapon 85, Forked Hatchet. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage. It also has bleed on it. And then you could also put cold on it, double status effect with this axe. It went absolutely crazy in my run, holy. It surprised me so much. I would definitely recommend trying out this weapon if you've never tried it out. It's way better than a forked tongue hatchet, no doubt about it. Weapon 84, Rivers of Blood. It is a somber katana that scales with dexterity and arcane. It does a split damage of physical and fire. and it also has innate bleed. See, a lot of people love to gas up this weapon for some reason. Like, they say it's overpowered. I mean, it used to be, don't get me wrong, it used to be way more powerful. But the Corpse Piler, like, it's a great Ash of War, but it's definitely not, like, S tier worthy. That's just my opinion, I guess, but it does not seem as overpowered as people talk. Weapon 83, Biddish Knight's Greatsword. It is a smithing greatsword that scales with strength and dexterity and does pure physical damage. Just another greatsword that you could put bleed on, and it just does better damage than other greatswords. That's why it's higher up on the list. Weapon 82, Bastard Sword. It is a smithing greatsword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It's just another greatsword that you could put bleed on and go crazy. Just better damage. I mean, not much else to say besides that. The range is pretty similar to all the other greatswords in the game. Weapon 81, Iron Greatsword. It is a smithing greatsword that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage. This is the greatsword that has the highest damage output than all of them. The rest of the other ones are like colossal weapons, if I'm not mistaken, so if you're gonna use a greatsword, it would probably be the Iron Greatsword here. Weapon 80, Dragon Halberd. It is a somber halberd that scales with strength and dex and does physical and lightning damage, and it does frost with the Ash of War. It's basically just a dragon scale blade but in halberd formation, you know? But it's also really easy to apply either way. I feel like it's more utility wise to use the spinning slash and apply the status like that instead of doing a slash and lightning coming down. Weapon 79, Brick Hammer. It is a smithing grey hammer that scales with strength and does strike physical damage. It is infusible with bleed and put wild strikes on it, and it's just another OP build basically. That's the simplistic way of using every great hammer in this game basically. Weapon 78, Greathorn Hammer. It is a smithing grey hammer that scales with strength and does purely physical damage. You can also infuse it with other status effects, and the defining trait of this is that you get HP restoration on every kill, which is basically the Godskin skin patch part. I forget what it's called, but it's that talisman basically. Other than that, it's just another grey hammer that you go crazy with. Crazy damage. Weapon 77, Frozen Needle. It is a somber thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. It has a cold passive, and the cool thing about this weapon is it actually shoots a projectile every time you do a charge R2. And it adds extra cold damage to that. And it also has Impelling Thrust as a Dash of War, so it's actually pretty decent in that aspect. But besides that, it's just another thrusting sword. Weapon 76, Noble's S-Stock. It is a smithing thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. You can apply any status effect to this that you want, you can infuse it. And it comes innately with Impelling Thrust. So that's decent, but you could also switch it out if you really wanted to. Just another different type of rapier. Weapon 75, S-Stock. It is a smithing thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex, and it does purely physical damage. You can also infuse this weapon. Basically, Noble's S-Stock with more range, better damage, so it's just slightly higher than it. Mesmer Soldier Spear. It is a smithing great spear that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Now, the only thing you should be putting on this weapon is RKR, and if you're not, I don't know what you're doing, because it's really OP with RKR. the double attack charge heavy goes absolutely crazy with it, and makes this weapon much better than it is. And you could also put bleed on it. Weapon 73, Watchdog's Greatsword. It is a smithing colossal sword that scales with strength and dex and does strictly physical damage. And like many other colossal swords, just amazing damage, But you could put bleed on this, and this weapon just gets overshadowed by some and shadows over others. Weapon 72. Fire Knight's Greatsword. It is a smithing colossal sword that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and fire damage. This weapon is amazing, strictly because it has a lot of piercing attacks, and you can also change it to have bleed on it. But the actual moveset of this weapon feels really good. I would suggest it if you like heavy thrusting swords, because that basically what this feels like at most points. Weapon 74. Sacrificial Axe. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and dex and does strictly physical damage. It innately comes with wild strikes, which is amazing, and it works really well with this weapon because you get FP back for every kill you do. So you just more and more wild strikes, but you could also have status effects applied to it if you wanted to as well. Weapon 70. Shamshur. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does strictly physical damage. And it's another curved sword, so you already know what that means. You better go grab 2 of them bad boys, put bleed on them, and go to work. And we're about to see a long stretch of them, so don't worry. Weapon 69. Severing God's Curved Sword. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Another curved sword, another seppuku user, another dual stance jump attacks, bro. I mean, it's just the meta, bro. Just straight jump attacks with curved swords. It's OP. Weapon 68. Mantis Blade. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical attack damage. Although this is a curved sword, and you could just, power stance and go crazy with it, it's actually a very cool weapon because it reminds me of like Bloodborne and the way it like opens up when you do a charge attack. It's pretty cool, but it's still more useful just power stancing the curved sword with bleed on it. Weapon 67. Falchion. Weapon 67. Falchion is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. I mean, not much to say. It just does better damage than the other ones. Simply, just still put bleed on it in power stance. Weapon 66. Grossmesser. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does strictly physical damage. I mean, do I even have to say anything? Put bleed on it. Jump attack. Go crazy. Weapon 65. Beastman's Curved Sword. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage. Once again, peak cinema, bro. Just power stance and bleed. Matter of fact, don't even need bleed. Just go crazy. It doesn't matter at that point. Weapon 64. Scavenger's Curved Sword. It is a smithing curved sword that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage. But there is a difference with this. It comes with innate bleed. Although it's very little, you could double status proc with this weapon. Kind of insane. Maybe even triple if you do power stance. Hey man, build ideas. But it's double, so you'll probably kill the boss before you even get the triple status anyway. But Weapon 63. Iron Cleaver. It is a smithing axe that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Just another crazy axe weapon that goes insanely fast. It also already comes with wild strike, so you could just put bleed on it and go even more crazy. It is just a W weapon in general. Weapon 62. Long Shaft Axe. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. You could also apply status effects to this weapon. Just another great axe, good damage, good status, good stance, all really good. Weapon 61. Rakshasa's Great Katana. It is a somber great katana that scales with strength and dex and it does physical damage with having innate bleed. The Ashwar Weed Cutter, you're not really getting that off a lot. Like even with Gideon, bro, he's rolling out of that. So you're basically just crutching on the Great Katana's like GOAT moveset. The Great Katana's moveset is actually amazing. It's not even funny at that point, but it's insane. Still a really good weapon. Weapon 60, Raptor Talons. It is a smithing claw weapon that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage while having innate bleed. And then you could switch it to have double status procs and put Cragblade on it. Absolutely goated. It's actually insane how good they are. Weapon 59, Misericord. It is a smithing dagger that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Now I would suggest putting parry on this or just having this in your inventory to parry, or not even to parry, to riposte, because this is the highest critical, riposte modifier in the game. It's actually insane. But other than that, yeah, it's just a really good stance breaking, damage dealing dagger. Put bleed on it if you really wanted to, but always have this to riposte. Weapon 58, Reduvia. It is a somber dagger that scales with dex and arcane. It deals purely physical while having innate bleed. Now this is really only good if the boss can actually bleed, because if it doesn't, it's pretty useless in that aspect. But the Reduvia Bloodblade goes absolutely insane. Spam that thing and they're bleeding like every single attack, especially if we're like right next to him, because it does a double hit when you're using the Ash of War. Really good. I would definitely recommend using this weapon. Weapon 57, Golem Fist. It is a smithing fist weapon that scales with strength and does purely physical damage. The main problem with this weapon is how much the stamina consumption is on the heavy attacks. If it wasn't for that fact, like legit every single heavy attack, if it double hits, your entire stamina's gone. It's actually insanity. It's actually still a really good weapon. Whole lot of bleed. If you put bleed on it, of course, and it does just base heavy. Weapon 56, Club. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and does physical damage. I mean, the club just goes crazy. Like every club in this game is basically OP. Like you just smack them over the head and they fall to their knees. And you put bleed on it or cold, either way. You can't really go wrong with this weapon. Weapon 55, Curved Club. It is a smithing hammer that scales with strength and dex and does only physical damage. It is basically the club, just slightly better, as it just does better physical damage. You can still put the same amount of stats effects on it. Weapon 54, Bloody Helix. It is a somber, heavy thrusting sword that scales with dex and arcane and does physical damage only. But it does have innate bleed, and you can increase that bleed with the arcane scaling. The Dynasty's Finesse, bro, is basically just the Obsidian Lamina, but a thrusting. Anyways, it's still a really amazing weapon. I love the thrusting, the piercing attacks, wonderful damage. Weapon 53, the Great Epi. It is a smithing heavy thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. The Great Epi, more piercing damage. Oh my god, I love it. Just put some bleed on it. It does so much damage. It's just so good. Oh my god, I love it. Weapon 52, Mugwin's Sacred Spear. It is a somber grey spear that scales with strength, dex, and arcane. It does a physical and fire damage split while having innate bleed. And this weapon, ooh, oh my god, this might be the best arcane weapon ever. Best. The Blood Boon Ritual, you just spam that thing over and over, and it acts as blood flame, so they continuously get bleed even afterwards. Oh my god, it's so good. And then it also gets a boost onto the spear when you hit them, so you're also doing blood flame on the spear. Oh my god. I'm glazing, but it's such a good arcane weapon. Such a good bleed weapon in general. Weapon 51, Black Steel Great Hammer. It is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength, dex, and faith while doing the physical and holy damage split. See, with this weapon, I can tolerate the holy damage because this thing is fun to use. Legit just guard counter? Oh my god. It creates that little like gold version that Radagon uses and adds more stance pressure. So fun to use. I could see why they're messing me up in the DLC, no lie. But you could also put bleed on it, go crazy, going belligerent. Weapon 50. Beast Claw Great Hammer. It is a somber great hammer that scales in strength, dex, and faith, and does a physical and holy damage split. Now this weapon is just absolutely insane with the stance pressure, bro. And the Regal Beast Claw, oh my god. You could just do it from afar and they walk right into it. Instant stance damage. This physical damage is off the charts, no lie. Weapon 49. Watchdog Staff. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength and dex, and does strictly physical damage. Now this weapon really surprised me when I first grabbed it. I was not thinking anything. I was like, a staff, ill, get this out of my hand. Even though it's a colossal weapon. But it's actually pretty cool. Like the stance damage is insane. And then the actual Ash of War, the sorcery of the Crozier, is actually pretty useful because a lot of times when bosses get very like passive, you just proc it and they like get re-aggroed because it thinks you're throwing a projectile and just getting free damage, and then you're back to getting poise damage. So it all works out really well, good synergy. Weapon 48. Gazing Finger. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength, dex, int, and faith while doing a physical and magic damage split. This weapon was so fun, I gotta say. I mean, if this was based on fun tier, this would be S tier. I had the best time ever, especially against Gideon. Oh my god. I think Gideon liked it too. Yeah, I think he liked getting fingered, no lie. Because the Ash of War, you could charge it, not charge it, doesn't really matter, just throw him in the air. But like the actual damage, it was not bad at all. Like it was doing consistently like probably like 1300 or something on a charge attack. I don't quite remember. But it was decent damage. And I think on Fire Giant, I was even doing like 1800 on a heavy. It was pretty crazy. Weapon 47. Poisoned Hand. It is a somber fist weapon that scales with strength and arc and deals purely physical damage while having an innate poison buildup. See, the Ash of War on this is actually pretty useful. It's basically just like the Matting Hand, you know, it's like an instant bleed. It's basically like an instant poison proc sometimes. Really depends. But the cool thing about this weapon is that you get a base, the Exultation of Rot, like Talisman. That's basically this. That's what its innate passive is. You get a free like buff every time you proc poison. It's actually pretty cool. So you could actually do a whole bunch of buff stacking with this. And it works really well with the poise damage it has. Weapon 46. Staff of the Avatar. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales in strength, faith, and dex, and does a split physical and holy damage. I mean, I didn't even notice the holy damage, like, at all. I didn't notice any dips. It's just so OP. Just straight heavies and light attacks. You don't need any type of status with this weapon. Just straight bonking them over the head with it, and it does amazing. Weapon 45. Duelist Great Axe. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. And it can be infused, guys. Everybody get to go wild. Ooh. And you know what you're gonna infuse it with? Wild Strikes. Because I told you to. Go put bleed and Wild Strikes on this. Instant win. Easy. Brain dead. You know. Amazing weapon. Weapon 44. Grafted Blade Greatsword. This is a somber colossal sword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Now you're thinking, colossal sword, that's amazing already, wow, we're gonna be chilling. But the Ash of War Oath of Vengeance, it gives you a temporary Godric Great Rune, +5 to every category. I forget how long, I think it's like a minute, but like that's so much more extra damage, especially early on in the game. Like if you get this, it's so easy to get too. You just go kill the Leonine Mist Beyond and down in the Weeping Peninsula. So easy. And then you just need to get the strength for it. But Weapon 43, Godslayer's Greatsword. This is a somber colossal sword that scales with strength, dex, and faith, and does a split physical and fire damage. Now this weapon's pretty decent itself being a colossal sword, but the Queen's Black Flame is so good against Elden Beast, it's not even funny. Like you legit just spam the Ash War over and over and it takes like seven hits or some crazy thing. It actually does really crazy damage anyway. It does like 2k like base damage maybe. Weapon 42, Troll Knight's Sword. This is a somber colossal sword that scales in strength and dex and does pure physical damage. This is very similar to the Troll Knight's Hammer, I believe it's called. But this is just a colossal sword and it's much better. Much better damage, much better stance breaks. It's amazing. The standard damage, not a lot of people are resistant to it. That Ash War, you're never getting it off. You know, get it out your head. Unless you're going against like some easily micro-staggerable enemies. You know, pray for your dreams, I guess. But still a very decent weapon. Weapon 41, Malachus Black Blade. It is a somber colossal sword that scales in strength, dex, and faith. And it does a split physical and holy damage. But that holy damage don't matter because you're using the Ash War, Destined Death. You're already reducing like a tenth of their health off that. But the Ash War does take a long time to get off, so. But once you do, even if you get hit out of it, hit them one time, easy. And it does like Black Flame, so it's fine. And it's also just decent damage in general. It has a high strength capability. Weapon 40, Twin Blade. It is a smithing twin blade that scales in strength, dex, and only does physical damage. I think this is the last of generic weapons, and it's pretty high up here. Rightfully so, because twin blades go absolutely crazy. I mean, you could put it on the Black Flame Tornado. I mean, you could dual wield and double bleed. I mean, there's so many versatile builds that you could do with twin blades. It's actually insane. Weapon 39, Godskin Peeler. This is a smithing twin blade that scales in strength and dex and does pure physical damage. It already comes with Black Flame Tornado, so that's amazing. You know, I have to go grab the Ash War for it. But it's just a slightly better twin blade than the twin blade. So, I mean, you could use all those same things that you would the normal twin blade, bleed and all that. Weapon 38, Twin Knight Swords. This is a smithing twin blade that scales in strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Now, I believe this is the best twin blade out of all of them, AP wise, and all still fusible, you know, with everything in the Black Flame Tornado and everything. Weapon 37, the Milady. It is a smithing light greatsword that scales primarily with dex and does pure physical damage. Holy. If you are not using Wing Stance and Relana's cameo with Shard of Alexander, what are you doing? Because that is the only reason why you should be using this, and it's really OP. Like, insanely OP. W weapon. Definitely highly suggest. Weapon 36, Zamora's Curve. Weapon 36, Zamora Curve Sword. This is a somber curved gray sword that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and does physical damage with also frost procs. See, when I first started using this, I thought this was just a normal curved sword, so I kept trying to jump power stance, and it looked terrible. I was like, what is this moveset? But after I realized it was a curved gray sword, man, it's just so good. Such a good weapon class in general. And the Zamora Ice Storm, it applies frostbite like instantly. Like, I don't think I ever not gotten a frost proc off the first Astral War hit. So, definitely one of the best curved greatswords in the game. Weapon 35, Flamberge. This is a smithing greatsword that scales with strength and dex and purely has physical damage while having an innate bleed buildup. This is a greatsword where you have the double status procs, and it has great damage in general. I mean, put Savage Lion's Claw, you could put Lion's Claw, RKR, double, Crag Blade, whatever you want. I mean, the damage is outright insane with this weapon. Weapon 34, Large Club. This is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and solely does physical damage. Just another club that does insane damage. It does even better damage than just regular clubs. I mean, and then you put bleed on it or cold, wild strikes. It just gets better and better, man. Insane. Clubs are so good. Weapon 33, Bloodfiend's Arm. It is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength and arc and does purely physical damage. But you could also apply bleed, which I definitely suggest. Man, if you played this on release, this gotta be like second most OP besides the lightning perfume bottles. Legit bleed every single attack. I mean, the bleed is much less now, but you still get the insane poise breaks with this weapon. Holy, I think it's like 2 charge R2s and most bosses are stance breaking off that. Weapon 32, Gargoyle Twin Blade. This is a smithing twin blade that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. Did I get y'all with that Twin Knights twin blade? Thought that was the best twin blade? Nah, the Gargoyle Twin Blade's better. Simply just because it does better damage, but W damage. Weapon 31, Putrescent Cleaver. This is a somber great axe that scales with strength, dex, and intelligence, and doing a split physical and magic damage. Now this weapon is so fun to use. I mean, you're just spamming the Ash of War, you're just spin wheeling all over the boss. So fun. And it also does frostbite, so that's great too. If you want to have some fun, just spam this Ash of War. You're gonna have a lot of it, guaranteed. Weapon 30, Claws of Night. This is a somber claw weapon that scales with strength and dex and does pure physical damage while having innate bleed. Such a W weapon. You basically get the added benefit of claw weapons while also being like a smith script type weapon with the ranged attacks. I think they have like each thread counts as a hitbox, so the bleed just goes crazy with it. Absolutely insane. Probably the best somber weapon in DLC, definitely. Weapon 29, Butchering Knife. This is a smithing great axe with dex scaling and does physical damage. Just like the Bonnie Butchering Knife, but they butchered that knife because you could put wild strikes on this weapon while also having bleed, while also still having the lifesteal passive. So it's like a million times better than Bonnie Butchering Knife. Weapon 28, Gargoyle's Greatsword. This is a smithing greatsword that is strength scaled focused and does purely physical damage. It still has vacuum slice as the Ash of War, but you could also change it if you really wanted to into a more, I don't know, more savage with the Lion's Claw or something. I don't know what you guys want to do. I'm just trying to give you a list. Jeez, stop questioning me. But put bleed on it, I would definitely suggest, man. Every single weapon, put bleed on it. Even if you can't. Find a way how. Weapon 27, Claymore. That is a smithing greatsword that has strength and dex scaling and does purely physical damage. And the Ash of War Lion's Claw, I mean, that's already good. But you can also go get other, things to infuse it with to get bleed or frostbite, or if you're a weird person, go put magic on it, whatever you want to do. Still a really good greatsword. Weapon 26, Bloodhound's Fang. It's a somber curved greatsword that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage while having innate bleed. And that bleed, It's not doing much because it's like 55, I believe. But Bloodhound's Finesse is what people really enjoy about this weapon, because you get that added iframes every time you come backwards and you go back forwards into the follow-up attack. But I've never been a huge fan of it, probably because I'm just ass with the Astral War, and never took my time out of it, but I can recognize how good of a weapon it is. Weapon 25, Great Mace. It is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and does physical damage. And as always, you could put infusions with this, and you definitely need to. Psych, this thing is so good. You just hit them with heavies and they're dead. Dead. I mean it. Like, it's actually crazy. Just over and over. You can even hit them with lights and they still stance break. Such a goated weapon. Weapon 24, Great Stars. This is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage while having innate bleed. Now imagine this is a great mace with spikes on it, and you could have double statuses. That's what Great Stars is. That's why it's goated. And you actually gain a small amount of HP, so, add the butchering knife into this, that everybody's just, circle jerking around into this weapon. But, it works out. Weapon 23, the Pickaxe. It is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and dex, and it does pierce physical damage. That's why it's so high up. Oh my god. If I have not stated enough, pierce is such a good attack type. Wonderful. But you could also put bleed on this, which is also goated. And you're also, if you do wield this, it's kind of crazy too. It's just jump attack. Everybody's, falling down to their knees for it. I would too. Weapon 22, Anspur Rapier. This is a smithing thrusting sword that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage while also having a base Scarlet Rot proc. I'm not sure there's any other weapon, actually there probably is, like the run, but this one's just better. Triple proc. Poison, rot, and bleed. Oh my god. That is goated, especially like when you're in higher NGs where like physical damage doesn't matter as much. I mean, just getting a rot and poison proc off, that's gonna take them down at least like 20%. It's actually insane. W weapon. Weapon 21, Giant Crusher. This is a smithing colossal weapon that is strength focused and does purely physical damage. The reason why people use this weapon so much for one-shot builds is mostly because it is a smithing weapon. You could put RKR on it, and then you could go into heavy to get S tier scaling within that, and it's just OP, such an easy, one-shot build. But you could also just put bleed on it if you really wanted to, but I really only did a one-shot build because that's what its main purpose is for. Weapon 20, the Great Sword. It is a smithing colossal sword that is strength scale focused and it does physical damage. The Gut Sword, oh my god. Goated. This is the whole reason I even came to Elden Ring in the first place. As I saw someone make a Guts build, I was like, okay, I'm buying it. And I copied it instantly, and I fell in love. Because it's such a good sword, bro. I would just put Giants Hunt on this, touch Gideon, live life, sunshines and rainbows, everything. Wonderful. Weapon 19, Backhand Blade. It is a smithing backhand blade that scales with strength and dex and does purely physical damage. The Ashwar blind spot that's already on it is wonderful, but I would suggest getting an infusible, put bleed on it, because you just hit so many times with backhand blades. It's actually, pointless not having a status effect on it at that point. But this weapon works so well, so fluid, even throughout the DLC. Weapon 18, Bandit's Curved Sword. It is a smithing curved sword that scales primarily with dex and does pure physical damage. Now this is, undoubtedly, objectively the best curved sword and probably the best for bleed build ever. I mean, it's just so high. I mean, seppuku, It's just better than every other curved sword in this category. Weapon 17, the Great Katana. It is a smithing great katana that scales with strength and dex, and does physical damage only, while having an innate bleed. I mean, the great katanas are so good in this game, it's not even funny. And being able to have a double proc with this, it's insane. I mean, I don't even know what to say, and you just keep overhead stands, you could put crack blade, whatever you really want, and it doesn't even matter. It's just such a good weapon. Oh my god. Weapon 16. The Great Omen Killer Cleaver. It is a smithing great axe that scales with strength and dex and does physical damage while also having bleed innately. I mean, a great axe that you could have double status procs with wild strikes. Oh my god, I'm glazing. I'm making donuts out here, bro. It's crazy. I mean, just straight up, just put wild strikes on it. I mean, it's already on it. Just put cold on it, and things are just gonna die in like 30 seconds, and it's so easy. Weapon 15, Helping Steeple. It is a somber greatsword that scales with strength and int, and does a split damage of physical and magic while also having innate frostbite. It already has frostbite, and then you just put Ruinous Ghost Flame on it, and it increases the frostbite. It's huge W. I mean, and it also just increases the amount of damage that you do. I mean, you really can't go wrong. The damage is pretty high with a Helping Steeple. Weapon 14, Venomous Fang. This is a smithing claw weapon that scales with strength and dex, and does purely physical damage while having an innate poison effect. See, the great thing about Venomous Fang, you could put Crack Blade and then have bleed on it, and you just have bleed and poison. I mean, that double proc with the claw aspect of it, you're just applying so much status effects. And like, you also just want like one-hand it and then do better poise damage too if you really wanted to. Which you should probably do that against Gideon because he's pretty annoying. Weapon 13, Hook Claws. This is a smithing claw weapon that scales with strength and dex, and does pure physical damage while having innate bleed. Now imagine Venomous Fang, but you have bleed and cold instead. Oh my god. I mean, it's just goated. You know, there's nothing else to say. You're gonna be proccing that so easily. You know, if you want to bring out a torch, reset the frost proc, you just keep hitting them, and you know, 27 frost procs later, you know, you just killed God. Weapon 12, Wing of Estelle. This is a somber curved sword that scales with dex and int, and does a split physical and magic damage. Now, when before I said the Bandit's curved sword is the best curved sword, this is in a different category. Because like, it's not even the same thing. This curved sword, on charge attacks, it does 2 projectiles. In the Astral War, the Nebula, oh my god, it's so goated. You legit do like 2 casts of this, I think every single boss is gonna stagger. Like, it's actually insane. It does so much damage, so much poise damage. And you could just do a charge attack build with this, and it just does so much damage, oh my god. Damage, 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 that's all you gotta know. Weapon 11, Great Club. This is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and faith, and it does primarily physical and some holy damage. You know, I was like, oh, holy damage, we're screwed. We're cooked. But this thing, when I tell you this thing melts, and I mean like 3 light attacks, they're staggered. 2, I mean like 1 charge, 1 light attack, staggered over and over again. And the Golden Land, I mean, it's not even that bad. Like, it just creates projectiles. You know, free damage. Goated weapon. Weapon 10, Devonia's Hammer. This is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength and faith, and it has a damage split of physical and holy damage. And if you thought Ordovis's sword was, you know, insane, wait until you try this hammer, bro. I mean, it may take longer to do the Astral War, but holy, it's just like, dum 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 boom, everybody's dead. Like, it's kind of crazy. And it just does high amounts of damage entirely. You don't even need status effects. You won't even notice it. Weapon 9, Anvil Hammer. This is a somber colossal weapon that scales with strength, faith, and int, while doing a physical and fire damage split. The smithing art spears Asher War is not even that good. I mean, it does do a multi-hit type thing, and you can use like wing sword insignia for that. But just the base damage on this weapon is actually insane. I mean, even with the splits, you know, it's just a good weapon. Weapon 8, Dragon Hunter's Great Katana. This is a Somber Great Katana that scales with strength and dex, and it does purely physical damage while having an innate bleed aspect. I mean, the Asher War on this Dragon Wound Slash is just amazing. It gives you like a range aspect of the weapon, and you're also still getting that bleed, and you do extra damage to dragons, even though there aren't any like major dragons required to beat the game. I mean, if you want to go fight Baylor, Placidusax, Fortisax, just use this weapon. It goes crazy. Weapon 7, Iron Bowls. This is a smithing fist weapon that scales primarily with strength and does only physical damage. Now, balls go hard. I think everybody knows this already. Go put cold on them probably, more often than not. Or you could just go put heavy on them and you go fight Radagon. I mean, they're going to stagger in 4 charge attacks instantly, and that takes like 2 seconds to do. I mean, I think everybody knows about this already. They're just way too overpowered. Weapon 6, Blasphemous Blade. This is a Somber Greatsword that scales with strength, dex, and faith. This deals a physical and fire damage split. Now, if there was the most brain dead weapon ever in this game, it would be this one. It's legit. Let me just hold down my Asher War button until the boss is dead, because you legit get health for every hit you do. So you're just gonna be trading. And if you're one of the people that uses mimic tiers, I mean, you should legit have 0 deaths on every boss that you ever do, because that's just a Taker's Flame over and over again. You're never gonna die. Weapon 5. Hold on. Weapon 5, Curved Great Club. This is a smithing great hammer that scales with strength and does pure physical. It's a club and a great hammer. Oh my god, you know. Let me close my mouth about it. Oh my god, let me wipe my lips real quick. But like Wild Strikes, bleed, absolutely goated. I mean, even just charge attacking with this, it takes like two charge attacks and they're down. Absolutely goated. Weapon 4, Rusted Anchor. This is a smithing great axe that scales primarily with strength, and this is basically the curved great club if it did pierce damage. That's why it's the GOAT! It's my goated weapon, if y'all can't tell. I actually love the Rusted Anchor. I use this anytime I can. Just put Wild Strikes on it or RKR. I mean, you could use this as a one-shot build if you really wanted to. I mean, it's just absolutely goated. Actually, if you want to use the 4th best weapon in the game, use Rusted Anchor. If you want to use my number 1 most favorite weapon in the game, use Rusted Anchor. Weapon 3, Death's Poker. This is a Somber Greatsword that scales with strength, dex, and int, and does a split physical and magic damage. I mean, I was really surprised this was considered a greatsword at first. I mean, it was just a huge stick. And if you know about speedruns, everybody uses this. Everybody knows how good it is. Just the base damage from the Asher War goes absolutely crazy, and then you add on the Frost proc with it, and then you add it as a greatsword, it does crazy poise damage. I mean, there's not much really beating this, I'm not gonna lie. And there are so many possibilities. You could do the big boom part of it, or you could do the land strip, or you could just do the regular part and then go right back to attacking. It's so versatile. Weapon 2, Dark Moon Greatsword. It is a Somber Greatsword that scales with strength and int, and does a split damage of physical and magic. Now, I think everybody knows about this already. It takes forever to get this weapon. The Asher War legit makes it a projectile and do better. It legit does frost damage. It does insane damage. It does a double attack on the actual Asher War. And, I mean, you legit can't, like, lose with this weapon, basically. It's so crazy. Unfortunately, it does take a lot of int levels, but You should be able to be like level 100 by the time you get to this part, man. Weapon 1, Star Fist. It is a smithing fist weapon that scales primarily with strength and does purely physical damage while having innate bleed. I mean, it's the GOAT. Everybody knows about spiky balls. Everybody loves spiky balls. We love rubbing on spiky balls. Yes, we don't try to exclude yourself. And you go put some cold on this. Oh my god, cold spiky balls. Oh my god, I'm salivating. Holy. I mean, there's no weakness besides range on this weapon. Insane poise, insane damage, insane status procs, quickness. Oh my god, so many build opportunities. I mean, this is like guaranteed objectively the #1 weapon in Elden Ring. Congratulations, you haven't made it to the end. How do you think the ratings were? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. And if you want to see more content like this, maybe check out one of these videos on screen. Until next time, y'all boys, peace out.